Okay, we should be set.
All right, thanks, Summer. I am going to call the regular city council meeting on January 25th to order at 6:04 p.m. And we're going to start with the roll call attendance. Summer? Are you going to do that?
Sorry.
Yep.
I have Mayor Joette Langanese, Ben Billingsley, acting deputy city manager and finance director, Carly Castle, acting city manager, Corey Shirtliff, planning and zoning administrator, I hope that's right, Danny Kaepernick with Snow Christensen, Jason Taylor, Moab City Council, Kaylin Jones, Moab City Council, Luke Wojciechowski, Moab City Council, Ronnie DeRestri, Moab City Council, and Tony Knutson Boyd, Moab City Council.
Thank you, Summer. As you heard, we needed to move two agenda items up from our original agenda because we had a conflict in timing with the attorneys, and I felt it was very important for you guys to have the opportunity to have the attorneys here and to ask your questions of the attorneys before you made the decision. And then if you had any questions during your deliberations on those items, that the attorneys would also be here for you to question if you needed to before you made your decision. So in order to do that, I need a motion to amend the agenda to move items 5.3 and 5.2 from old business to above citizens be heard, which is number 2. So if I could have a motion to amend the agenda. Ronnie?
I would like to make an alternate motion, which is to allow the attorneys now to speak to the item, but to keep the vote on the item in the agenda where it originally was, after citizens to be heard, so that people have an opportunity to speak as they were led to believe on the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to move to not amend the agenda, but to allow the attorneys to speak and keep the agenda item as it was on the original agenda. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
We have a motion made by Ronnie, seconded by Kaylin. Any discussion, Ronnie?
I think it is part of our responsibility when we put an agenda out to the public and they're given the impression that they have a right to speak before action items, that we honor that.
Thank you. Kaylin?
So I support the sentiment. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. So I seconded it in part to have staff and as well as you to give some input. If that's our intention, would it be better to move the items to where you proposed, Joette, and then table them until their original table action until their original place in their meeting? I'm not sure under what authority, if you will, that's not the right word, but to allow the attorneys to speak to basically a different item.
Corey, would you like to address that?
Maybe a suggestion. I think the notion is to allow citizens to be heard in the case that there are citizens speaking to the particular items we're hearing. But for the same matter, we would like to retain Danny Kaepernick, Snow Christensen representation for our land use consulting attorney throughout the agenda items, so that if through discussion new questions come up, we have Danny right there, so that if it is tabled and then questions come up, we won't have those readily available. So might I suggest a slightly abbreviated where we allow if it is for citizens to be heard on a very tight turnaround schedule, so that we can get to these items to allow for Danny to be closing at 7, and then we can move on with those items. Does that sound like we're getting the best of everybody? So Danny's here for the whole items, but citizens are able to go first as long as they're on that tight.
Mayor, I actually have 8 people in the waiting room for citizens to be heard at this point.
Okay. So, I really feel as though it's important for the attorney to be here throughout the full discussion. Summer, is there any way you can find out if any of these citizens are here to discuss the development agreement and let them know that we will allow them to speak on this particular item?
I don't have a way to communicate with anyone in the waiting room.
Okay. So Kaylin, what are your thoughts on that?
You could let them all in and ask them.
We could.
We could.
Mhm.
I just,
Mayor, would you like me to let them all in?
sure.
Danny, in the meantime, can you talk a little bit more about your schedule? I know you have a commitment at 7. We originally had you scheduled for 8, but you were worried it would go long. So is there an opportunity maybe to return?
There is. So I also have to speak at the Orem City Council meeting this evening. So I'm set to begin there at 7. And my concern was making the council here wait. I'm not sure how long that discussion will go. I think at least an hour, hour and a half. But after that, I'm happy to join if the meeting is still going and people are still awake, and still I'm available as late as you need me after that's complete. But I just didn't want to keep people waiting on me.
That might be another option. I do think our meeting will go past 8:30. I would suspect that. So just something to consider, Mayor.
Okay. So how many people on this call are here for agenda items 5.3 or 5.4? I know Jake, I know you are. Judy?
Joette, I'm just here because I just want to make a comment about
Water.
water.
Judy, are you here for the development agreement discussion? Diego, are you here? Mr. Jones? You're muted. Okay, so Judy, it's, you know, and it appears you're here to just make a comment on the development agreement. So we are making, we have a motion on the table to amend the agenda to have that development agreement first above citizens to be heard. So we would like to have you be able to speak towards that item, and then we will, well, first let's act on the motion that we have, but we would like for you to be able to speak on that item. You're muted, Judy. Yeah.
You're
So-
unmuted now, Judy.
Oh, Zoom meetings. You gotta love Zoom meetings. Judy, are you here to speak on the action item 5?
I am, but I'm getting like everybody talking at once. I'm getting like 3 different things. So this is really confusing.
So Judy, you just need to mute your YouTube feed because you're hearing YouTube and the meeting.
Okay.
All right. So let's move on the motion to amend the agenda to move item 5.3 and 5.4 above citizens to be heard and allow Judy to speak towards that item before we start the discussion. It's, so that's the motion we have on the table to amend. And, oh no, yeah, the motion on the table is to amend the agenda to allow the attorneys to answer questions and not to move the agenda items, right? That's the motion.
Correct.
And I think we're recommending that we keep the agenda items together with the attorney in the room. And so I'm going to call for the question. Does anybody else on the council have any discussion on that agenda item or on that motion? Okay, Ronnie, how do you vote?
I'm still unclear on the motion. Can you repeat it?
The motion is to amend the agenda to allow the attorneys to be available for discussion and keep the agenda item as it is on the current agenda. So item 5.3 and 5.4 will stay on the agenda as is, but we're going to allow the attorneys to speak before the citizens are going to be heard. Other than, well, yeah, then I guess we don't really need Judy if we do it that way. So. That's the motion you made.
Okay, so attorneys will answer questions. We will resume and have citizens to be heard and then address these two agenda items as action items as they're written on the agenda.
If the motion passes, and it needs to pass by 2/3 of vote.
My vote is aye.
Galen,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Luke,
Aye.
Tawny.
I guess.
I know. Sorry about this. You can blame it on the attorneys. We initially wanted this to start sooner, but the attorneys weren't available and we felt it was very important. The motion passes 5-0, so we'll keep the agenda as the same as it is. And Danny, if you want to go ahead and Judy, we can take everybody out of the room. Jake can stay in the room for this discussion. But Summer, everybody else, if you guys can just go in the waiting room, and Judy, you'll speak during the normal citizens to be heard once we're done with this discussion with the attorneys. And then Danny, if you're available, maybe Corey can give you a text and let you know where we are on the agenda, and then you can come back in. Hopefully, this, I'm hoping that the meeting won't go that long, but I kind of have a feeling I'm wrong about my hopes. My hopes will be dashed. But so here we go. This is a discussion with the attorney on action item 5.3 under old business. And that action item is an approval of the development agreement for 398 Cane Creek Boulevard. And I'm not going to read the rest, but that's the item on the agenda that Danny is here to discuss. So council, I'm going to open it up to you for any questions that you might have of Danny regarding that action item. Any questions of the attorney? Well, you got her. Ronnie?
So Danny, could you start by explaining to the public, because for years as council members, we were told we couldn't tie a specific development to a zone change, because once the zone change happens, the menu of allowed uses in that zone are open to the developer, and that we could not say to a developer, oh, that's great that you want to build X, but once we give you the zone change, we can't guarantee that X will be built, because we were told for years that that was called contract zoning and it wasn't something we could do. So now we're being told that you can zone by contract or do development agreements. But this is a relatively new discussion and we haven't had a workshop on it as a council. So can you start by explaining the difference between contract zoning and development agreements?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think there's two different aspects of contract zoning that do present challenges that we don't have here. One would be where a city council commits through a contract to rezone property. And that's not what we have in the development agreement here, because it specifically recognizes that the rezone application is a separate process that will be handled through the city's normal process for any other rezone application. So that's what I would say is concern number one, where you're trying to circumvent normal processes to just do something by contract rather than go through those normal processes. And that's not what we have here, because there's no commitment by the city council to rezone this property. It's just an underlying condition that has to be met before the development agreement even comes into play. And then the second concern would be where a city council is trying to grant a landowner additional rights that they would not have under the current zone, thereby, so they're not saying that we'll rezone the property, but effectively we will give you additional permitted uses or other things that the zone ordinarily would not allow. And so those are kind of the two concerns that we would have about a development agreement being what you would think of as illegal contract zoning. And this development agreement doesn't do either of those. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Anybody else? Tawny?
Danny, I apologize. I have been sick, so talking is not my best thing. I just would like to clarify, did I read correctly in this development agreement that if for some reason this developer does not buy this piece of property, it reverts to it reverts to the original zoning? If we accept the development agreement and then agree to the rezone and somehow the sale fails, it goes back to its original RA1 zoning?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that is how there's two conditions precedent for the development agreement to come into place. And one is that the developer does ultimately acquire the property. And then the other is that the rezone occurs. So if either of those don't happen, then the development agreement basically is void and just doesn't have any effect. But that's right. And that should be a condition of the rezone, in my opinion. Because the development agreement does provide for that, but that's something that I think should be part of the rezone process.
So I want to clarify that really quick, Danny. Do you mean if they vote on the rezone and ultimately like make a motion to approve a rezone later on, that should be part of their motion?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that the development agreement is written right now, it does have that the permitted uses would revert back to what it was. But the rezone, if that is separately approved, will have taken effect. And so I do think there needs to be a separate process to rezone if the developer doesn't actually acquire this property, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That the Corey has something that I'm.
Yeah, just as we're talking about this, and Jake's on the line as well. The updated information is that the applicant has purchased the property at this point. From the beginning of this agenda item, he had not, but he has now. So he has fulfilled that, at least that component of it.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then the development agreement, I think you could amend to take out that condition since it's already been satisfied, and that there would be then no worry about the rezone reverting back.
I guess kind of like if we were ever to encounter a similar situation in the future and there was kind of this almost like conditional rezoning, doesn't that almost kind of not fall in line with what was described initially, where these are like two separate processes, but by adding this like conditional rezoning, aren't we kind of flirting with like contract zoning?
Yeah, so the main concern is that the city goes through the correct process for a rezone. And so what you can't do is through a contract, which, you know, doesn't come up from the planning commission, it just comes straight before the city council. Through that, you cannot commit the city to rezone property or just automatically do it through the contract. But the contract can recognize that there's this separate process that must be followed, and that's what we have here. And so the developer will have to go through that separate process to get the rezone. It follows the same process that any other individual would go through. There's a recommendation from the planning commission, and then, you know, there's a yes or no vote from the city council, but they're tied to the development agreement, but it's separate. And the trouble comes in where the development agreement either tries to do that with skipping the planning commission and skipping all the notice and everything, or where the development agreement promises that the city will do it, because that's a promise that the city can't make. And this development agreement is really clear that that promise isn't being made, that the rezone application has to go through the normal process, just like it would if this development agreement wasn't in place.
Kaylin, you had a question?
It's not clear. The closing of the property made my question moot.
Okay. Anybody else? Ronnie? You're muted, Ronnie.
Is there anything in the development agreement that specifies whether these units would be for sale or rental or a combination?
Corey?
It is used terminology for rental and sale that 33, it can be either. It's a matter of occupancy. 33% of the units occupied must be meeting the standard of active employment household. So those could be either leased or sale units, but they would be deed restricted, dedicated units.
Okay, next question. Oops, sorry, one sec. Oh, the element of the development agreement that allows the units that are set aside for active employment households, is for a minimum of 9 months per calendar year. So would that allow, for example, rental of a unit as either a short-term rental or obviously it allows it to be rented to someone who does not fit the criteria of an active employment household, correct, for those 3 months?
That would not be the intention of that. That is, I think there are sections of the default clauses that go into that, but that would supersede our existing ordinance, which is no overnight accommodation. So they could long-term rental, but it would have to fit in those parameters. And if they default by either not complying with the time periods, whether it be a 90, I'm out of order of where the multiple days are, but after 30 days of written notice, 90 days for compliance, 90 days within the calendar year for 9 months minimum active employment. The intention is no, it cannot be short-term rented. And if that dedicated unit is not being for active employment household, our code compliance could pursue that as a default in the agreement. Sorry, that was a bit jumbled, but is that clear where those lines are?
I'm going to wait for the attorney to comment, and I will find the paragraph that I can read that specifically refers to this because it's vague in there.
It's on this, I believe.
So I think I found the paragraph that you're referring to, and it's a good question, but that requirement that it be occupied by an active employment household for at least 9 months, it doesn't grant the developer any rights that would interfere with the current code. So if short-term rentals are not permitted, this doesn't create an exception to that. Any rental of the property would still need to comply with all other aspects of Moab City ordinances.
So, but does that mean that 3 months out of the year you could rent to a non-active employment household?
If it's otherwise consistent with Moab City ordinances, the household has to have active employment households within it for at least 9 months under the term of the agreement. So if it's not for 3 months, for various reasons, like somebody loses their job and it doesn't qualify as a household, an active employment household anymore, or it's rented consistent with Moab City ordinances for 3 months, that wouldn't be a violation of the deed restriction.
Okay, so just to paraphrase, if you could do a unit that was set aside for active employment households for 3 months out of a year, you could rent that to a non-active employment household.
If it was consistent with other ordinances, that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And then also, what happens if you have a requirement that says you need to rent to an active employment household for 9 months out of the year and you can't find people who qualify? What happens to that unit? It sits empty?
Yeah, so it would be a restriction on basically on the title for each of these units, that this would be a requirement, and they either need to be owned or occupied by somebody that meets that definition.
Okay, so in other words, if I were selling these units and I couldn't find enough buyers, the units couldn't be sold?
If you're, yeah, they need to be sold to people that meet the definition of the active employment household. Corey has a comment though. Maybe there's a
or
nuance.
leased, just to tag on to that. And the subsection I was referencing is in the specific development standards, subsection F, which I think clarifies because there are sections that reference each other, but without trying to read too much into it, is that it would be a default of the restricted covenant if the active employment unit is occupied by any household that is not active employment household. If 30 days after the written notice of the city active employment unit is not occupied, likewise, it would default if the active employment unit is not occupied for more than 90 days in the calendar year. So you are not able to buy a unit, this is a defense against working around as a second home. This is defending against that. So the occupation must be legitimate. There are, of course, occasions where there's a lapse of active employment status and what we're going to do there, but that's not what this specific section is talking about. It's talking about you're not able to purchase this, maintain it as unoccupied, and then utilize it for the weekends you're down here in Moab. It must be occupied under those terms, and then the noticing requirements following that. And that's just to help supplement, because again, it's multiple sections that I think reference each other in that regard.
Yeah, I'm just reading a section. Well, I can read the section I'm reading, which to a layperson and non-attorney leaves that open.
Ronnie, instead of reading the whole section, can you just reference this section that you're referring to so that the attorney and staff can look at that?
Well, let's see. I use the entire full packet, so I can give you the number. Otherwise, you guys will want to go to 3 on specific development standards, and it is item item C. It looks like it's probably page 3 of, let's see, of the development agreement.
Thank you.
That I think is referencing to phasing.
I'm sorry, not
opening of the market.
D. Sorry, D. It starts, except as otherwise agreed to by the city and developer or its successors or assigns. Active employment units shall only be occupied by households who qualify as active employment households. Active employment units shall be occupied by active employment households a minimum of 9 months per calendar year. So that's where it leaves the question of those other 3 months. And I don't need to spend
and then,
more time on it. I think I understand.
Okay.
And then, and thank you for answering that question about what happens if people cannot afford these units. Then there is a question about the development agreement. There is nothing in it outside of the bounds of what we allow in different zones. If we sign the development agreement, that would guarantee that we would see a certain minimum or maximum number of units, right? Just because we know the maximum is 165, and we know what the minimum is. I understand that there are 2 years before any units to allow for the beginning of construction. But for people reading this, they should not assume that necessarily there would be 165 units versus, you know, some smaller number. Is there any minimum?
There are no minimum number of units, and this DA would only be the percentage, which is good because it can stretch and flow with however the site plan develops or whatever the resulting product is.
Okay, and then another question for the attorney. If this were to wait until our current work underway on looking at density in R3 and R4 zones, which is supposed to be completed by the middle of April. If this were to wait, this piece of property would be held to those standards, correct?
So I'm not sure that I understood the question. Yeah.
I'll let the planner use language that you understand. We are currently in the process of setting some standards on density. Yeah, I'll let you explain it, Corey.
Right. So this DA is a reaction to the general motion that City Council is directing Planning Department on in context of our Resolution 2021-33, which is pending ordinance doctrine enacting resolution that we are going to require a certain percentage of units in the multi-household zone, the R3 and R4, dedicated to active employment households. Essentially, what we're doing in this agreement. The difference is that with this agreement, the developer is willing to commit to 33%. Right now, we're using that as a standard for developments moving forward, but there's no guarantee that we are going to have 33% or what the other qualifying components of that are. So this DA is ensuring you're getting what you're looking at. There's no guarantee that as a result of this resolution, the ordinance would pass. And if it did pass, it would look like this. We can go into that further when we talk about the rezone and once Danny isn't so time specific, but that's what the difference is there.
And so is the question, could the city council just wait and rely on the ordinance that may or may not pass in the future and apply that to this project? Is that?
Oh, I mean, I know the answer to that. I know the answer to that is yes, because my understanding of what I've been told is that anyone, who is in this position, has been told we're working on this ordinance and they need to wait for us to finish that process. I mean, aside from the request for a development agreement. So I understand that other people would be in a situation. No one has told me this is vested. So I understand that anybody else would be waiting for that process to play out.
That's correct. The one component of this is that this is an RA1 zone as is. So this would not apply to this zone if we do not pass this DA and then do not pass the rezone. That would be a by right development. I have a matrix later on in the presentation that will show what basically we can forecast each path that we could choose, what we might end up with. Which might be a helpful visual, but the rest of the R3, R4 will be held to an approximate standard to what we're looking at here, but this is specific to this development. Looks like Kaylin has a question.
I just wanted to follow up with this because I think I had the same question that Ronnie did, which I think the development agreement answers in section 8.1. My question was, if the city ultimately adopts a greater percentage of active employment households, would this property be subject to it? And it appears not. Because where it states where any conflict or ambiguity exists between the provisions of the code and this agreement shall govern. So we're locking in the 33%. And that's the gamble we're making.
Correct.
Yes, whereas it would remain an option for the developer to wait out what we decide. And we have not had any discussions as a body about this yet. So I don't know if it'll be 33% or higher or lower or what. But there is a chance that if they weren't coming to us at this time with this development agreement, that they could still apply for a rezone at a later date based on whatever we decide we're doing at that time.
Corey.
In response to that, in communications with the applicant, I think it's been, and he can certainly speak to it himself later on, but that is an expressed, he's expressed no interest in that. Right. The fact that we're talking now, he is going to move forward with whatever the result of this is, right. Whether that be a by right in the RA1, a PUD in the RA1, or this rezone. So as that might be a chance, it might be. But given cost of construction and the world we're living in, I think the developer is ready to move on this property, having purchased the property. So whatever we decide will likely be the resulting development.
Thank you. Tani?
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm not so concerned with the tools that we use. I'm concerned with the outcome. I want to see houses built in this town. There's very little chance that these units will not fill up with people that can afford them and people that buy them for whatever reason to live here and work. You can dig a hole with a garden trowel, with a shovel, or a backhoe. Sometimes the garden shovel and the garden trowel and shovel make sense. When you're digging a big hole, a backhoe is the tool to use. This seems like it's the tool to use, and we need to stop just dithering back and forth. This has been in front of us for a long time. This is not a new discussion.
Luke or Jason, any comment from you while we've got the attorney? We've got her for another 20 minutes.
Yeah, I guess my question is kind of regarding how established is the case law regarding this? From what I understand is like the city council has kind of been told the opposite of this for a while, and then potentially in response to some litigation that has resolved in the past couple of years, this is kind of an assessment that's been made based off of some of those decisions. And so like it might, I guess my concern is that based on like kind of an interpretation of just a couple of like judicial precedents, like this is the assumption that we're making, like how much liability or risk are we running into somebody actually potentially trying to file some sort of legal action to prevent this, and like us getting kind of caught up in a whole bunch of drawn out legal processes.
Yeah, so without going into any discussion that would be normally privileged between us and the city council, because we want to make sure that we're not waiving any privilege there. So there's a statute that was adopted in 2021 that governs development agreements. It's part of the Land Use Development and Management Act. So it's 10-9A-532, and that specifies that municipalities can enter into development agreements, and it outlines a few different things that the development agreement cannot do, and what's being proposed here doesn't conflict with any of those. So this doesn't fall within the specifically identified things you can't do. So you can't adopt a land use regulation. You can't bind future councils and prevent them from taking a certain action, things like that. And this doesn't fall within any of those. And I think this section came after the Wallingford decision, which you guys are probably somewhat familiar with at least. And that's really the leading case in Utah on this idea about contract zoning and what cities can do to settle land use disputes and do through a development agreement. And the big takeaway there is that you can't circumvent any existing process. So you can't use a contract to skip over like that rezone application, right? You have to go through the process and the notice provisions and the hearing to get a rezone of the property. You can't just commit to do it by contract. And so that's the thing that is really clear from the Wallingford decision. And it's something that this agreement isn't doing, because we're not trying to jump over or circumvent any normal approval process.
Jason.
I'm good. I don't have any questions that need to be answered right now.
Okay, thanks. Ronnie?
So another question for you, Danny. What, if any, kind of legal precedent does this set if we were to pass a development agreement at a time we're working on an ordinance that is, you could argue, related to this? Does it set a precedent for any other developers who would like a development agreement before we finish that process on their properties?
Yeah, it doesn't set a precedent in the sense that it's something that commits the city council to acting in any particular way going forward. You know, each project is unique, and there's always going to be individual concerns that may drive a decision that's different in one instance than in a different instance. So it doesn't bind you to do the same thing with another developer. Yeah, but you know, it is something that people know about. So yeah, it's out there, but I don't think it sets a precedent in a legal sense where it would commit you to act in a particular way, because there are these unique and individual concerns that you consider on a case-by-case basis.
And then one more thing, back when our council met in December, there was discussion at that meeting about misleading stuff in our agenda summary that made it sound like our council knew about the development agreement before the last draft was sent to the developer in November. And several of us spoke up to say that that was in fact in error and that was not the case. And so I just want to restate again that that is incorrect, but I also feel like in the interest of transparency and making that correction that do we have a legal right as council members to know who paid for the development agreement and how much it cost?
Yeah, so I'm not really sure on that. That's a little bit outside of what I'd be prepared to talk about. So I'm not sure if you're talking about getting access to like the developer's attorney fees. I don't know that there'd be a basis.
Oh, I just didn't know if the city paid for it or if the developer pays for development agreements, how that works. Just, you know, for my residents, so they know if they paid for it.
Carly?
Yeah, no, I can answer that. We paid our attorneys first at Parr Brown and now with Snow Christensen to develop this agreement. We didn't have the developer do it because, I mean, usually whoever writes the agreement gets a little more control over the editing of it.
Thanks, Carly. Anything else, Ronnie?
Do we get to know how much it cost?
You know, off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know, like, when it comes to even the legal advice we've gotten from Snow Christensen and from Parr Brown. So there's the writing of it, which I don't think is I mean, it's not a standard form, but I don't think that took much time. What's taking time is just sort of the back and forth as we negotiate it with you and the developer. So we can definitely try to pull that because Robert and Danny have been almost exclusively doing this work for us. We can definitely report that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure you see Kaylin's raised hand.
Oh, thank you. Kaylin, I don't see, oh, there you are. You disappeared for a minute, Kaylin. Question.
So I'm wondering if, Danny, if you could explain if there's anything significant about section 8.3. Is the bottom line for that the city just has to give written notice prior to making changes to R3 or RA1 that might affect the development? Written notice to the developer? Is that the bottom line?
Yeah, so this is a pretty standard provision that you see in development agreements, and it's because the general rule is that once a project or an application vests, they're entitled to approval and consideration under the laws that are in place at the time. But the city council does have the ability to essentially make some new rules retroactive under specific circumstances. And when that occurs, there's a requirement that the city find that there is a compelling countervailing public interest. It's kind of a mouthful, but it comes into play typically where there's an issue of real severe public safety. One of the few cases that has upheld it involved some geotechnical studies and possible earthquake issues. So even though there had been a development that was approved for this area, new rules came into place and applied retroactively. And so this gives the developer an opportunity to be heard as part of that process if the city was considering adopting something that would be made retroactive despite the vesting. So it's, like I said, a pretty standard provision, and just make sure that that their due process rights are covered. And before the city made that determination, the developer would be on notice and have the right to participate.
Okay, thanks. And another unrelated question. It's quite possible that the city would contract with another entity for the monitoring of the employment status of occupants. Is there anything in this agreement that would prohibit that?
There's nothing that I saw in the agreement itself that would prohibit that. So using somebody else, I mean, obviously subject to all other laws and ordinances that are in place, but.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Kaylin. Anybody else? Comments from staff? Mr. Sutterfield, I know you're on the line, but we'll wait and have you chime in when we get to that item on the agenda. So we'll probably put you in the waiting room until we get to that point. And Danny, I have a feeling we're going to be here until this item is probably not going to be up for discussion for another at least hour and a half. So be prepared that we'll want you to come back in. And Corey, if you could just text her when we get to that item on the agenda. And thanks, council, for all your questions. Very good. Really appreciate you being here and arranging your schedule so that council had the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for being so accommodating.
You bet. You bet. Okay, moving on to citizens to be heard. Summer, if you could bring Judy in first, because she wanted to talk specifically to this item, and since it's fresh on our minds, that would be great.
Sure,
And so
you should be joining.
she's here. Judy, welcome back. We wanted you to speak towards this particular agenda item first, and if you could keep your comments to 2 minutes, that would be great.
I will do my best. I haven't had a chance to totally organize it, especially after that new information, but I'm a little concerned about spot zoning, and I would love it if we could wait. I do feel like we're being held hostage. Just a quick note that there are definitely some typos in this development agreement, so you might want to pay attention to whether it's 7.98 acres or 7.78 acres. It happens a lot. I'm still not clear who can buy it. Is that the issue of the county? Can anybody buy it? Or do they have to live here and work here in order to be able to own it? It's not, just 1 second. We're fostering 4 puppies. Sorry, David, can you keep the puppies down? We have, and I'm not quite clear in the agreement. I guess it is for the R3 affordable. So it does go under that extra 2 or extra 3 in the 60 or 80 median income. So that wasn't clear, and there's nothing that I saw in the development agreement that addresses the affordability aspect. And I found the numbers really confusing because in one place it has the land requirements are 5,000 square feet per 2 household units and 2,000 square feet per 3 or more household units. And that's probably where they're getting this extraordinarily high number. But also in the planned unit development, it says that it's 8 dwellings per acre and up to a maximum of 10 units for affordable housing density. So the numbers are, I'm not understanding the numbers. It seems like a really, I'm getting either 60, well, 59 or 174. So that is a little confusing to me. So as a citizen really trying to understand this, and apparently I'm coming in late to this, that does seem like, it seems like they're getting a 300% increase for, the numbers are being thrown around, but like 53 affordable housings. And that's, I would like it to be a lot higher. So if you decide that you need to do this with the other ones, I would certainly vote for a much higher affordable housing percentage. I think that's incredibly low, especially if they're getting, again, a 300% increase. And I think, and Kaylin kind of mentioned this, but I think there needs to be some very serious consideration about who's going to monitor this and how it's done. I know that's already an issue with the county, and I think that there needs to be some clarification about how you're going to implement that. And I guess those are my main concerns. I just feel like, I feel like, again, we're doing spot zoning and being sort of forced into something, especially with, I've got some concerns about, well, the sewer I read about, but even the roads on Cane Creek don't really seem to be able to accommodate 174 units at this time. And who's going to pay for that, and how's that going to work? So I guess those are my concerns at this time.
Thanks, Judy. Appreciate it. Nice to see you. Next up, Summer.
John Weishite should be joining us.
John, you're up. You're muted. And again, just to reiterate, if you could keep your comments to 2 minutes, that would be great.
Oh,
So I
I'm
guess those are my
sorry. You know,
concerns at this time.
I realize now that there's a time delay between YouTube and
Yeah.
So, hey, hi, everybody. So I have just wanted to say that in 2005, the Bureau of Reclamation began a shortage criteria document, and it's now being revised. But the important thing I want to share is in 2007, the National Academy of Sciences weighed in. And here's what they said. They said there are two issues that the Colorado River Basin community needs to look at. And one is the urban governments are going to be highly affected by the changes in climate and how it's going to impact growth in cities for all 7 states in Mexico. And two, that it's critically important that you don't do this in closed sessions, that you open this up to the public. They especially wanted the tribes to be involved. And I wanted to say that the federal government is taking this seriously. They are going to be involving the tribes. Just last week, they intentionally asked 50 NGOs to participate in comments and a webinar. And so the trend is to open this up to the public as much as possible. And the other thing the National Academy of Sciences said is use us, please. I mean, we're scientists. We're here to help. You just need to ask us. And so that's what I would like Moab and Grand County to do, is to ask scientists to come and present to you, to show you what is going on in the Colorado River Basin. And I can help you do that. And so at some point in time, I would like to write a white paper or something to share with you and give you suggestions about how to handle future water situations in Moab and Grand County if you would appreciate a white paper of that sort. That's it. I hope that was 2 minutes.
It was, John, and thank you so much. And more conversation to be had. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we should be adding Mike Duncan.
Mike, you're connecting to audio. You're muted. You just couldn't stay away, I guess. Mike? Can you hear us, Mike? All right, you're unmuted. You're ready to go. It's nice to see you again.
Good, because I can't see me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, very quickly, thank you guys so much for the mayor and the 2 new board members. There's an item on the agenda tonight, water utility resource management plan. I want you guys to know that this has been a subject of intense interest among many people here in the Valley for 4 years now. So it's been heavily studied. There have been 3 basically hydrological models. The canonical one is done by the USGS. Took them 2 or 3 years to do it, concluded more or less in 2018. They studied all the water in the valley, not just the water, the so-called pristine culinary water and what's called the Glen Canyon aquifer. And it looks like we had a fair amount of water to spare, but most of that was Mill Creek surface water, okay, which is groundwater at one point and ends up being a stream. So the first thing I ever learned from Mark Stilson, who's a Southeast Utah water rights engineer, is that that's a typical thing that cities do, is they appropriate what was agricultural surface water to use as culinary water. And that's still an option for us if anybody wants to do that. The second study was from a consultant who the city hired to study a variety of things. He did a lot of great work. He did a budget, which in my opinion is not worth a lot. I don't like the way he modeled it. I don't have time to go into the details, but he basically drew a giant ring around, a bathtub ring around the area, and subtracted two noisy numbers from each other to get an even noisier result. So I don't trust his budget numbers. The latest USGS study, and the one that's the most controversial, was not an official USGS paper, but it was done by pretty much the same group of USGS people who went on to study water chemistry and found out some interesting things about where water was coming from and where it was going. And the controversial thing is that by his model, we are at safe yield now in the Glen Canyon aquifer, all right, which originates high in the La Salles and comes down in the three sandstone layers on the east side of the valley. So that model is not accepted, not understood and contested by both Mr. Williams and by Mr. Stilson. And I agree with that. There are unknowns and so forth. And still, it's a very interesting data point that I don't think we ought to ignore. But mostly what I want to tell you guys on council is here that I want to reinforce this, all right? It is council's job to set policy. This is not a staff issue. If the city goes off and spends $250,000, which would get us a nice new bridge over Pack Creek, from the way I read it, the study is more about talking to entities, which is, as I say, has been going on for 4 years already, about our future needs. And I am very skeptical that anything worthwhile is going to come out of that. Now, Carly and Chuck may tell me, oh, Mike, that's not what we intend to do at all. But that's as little as said in the MOU that's proposed in front of you. It leaves the whole thing up in the air and very nebulous. And as I say, under those circumstances, I am skeptical about it. So I would encourage all of you guys to look beyond the end of your nose at our water situation. You don't have to do much but read the newspapers to know that we're in a drought, climate change, and a lot of growth in front of us. And the tone of the whole proposal here by city staff is that we can make water appear magically for the next 100 years. We'll find a way. Well, guys, it's not that easy. There is a finite limit to how much water we're recharging every year, and we're still struggling to find it. But we all agree that there's not a lot of water to go on. So, and finally, closing, I'd like to say I would not approve this nebulous agreement as a minimum until city staff gives you some idea what's going to come out of it that will actually contribute something positive to what we already know. This is not an engineering problem. This is a hydrology water recharge problem, and it's a very complex issue, and it's hard to get a handle on it and so forth. But anyway, that's I would be again skeptical about supporting an expensive study that I am skeptical will result in anything terribly useful. And by the way, you guys, Carly, you guys might want to put it, the consultant put in the Moab Irrigation Company. I'm on that board, and their surface water is sure to be an important part of what is going to be coming down the road. So make sure you think of them just as equally as you think of the other entities in the study. So thank you guys for listening, and
Thanks,
good luck
Mike.
with it all.
Thank you.
Mayor, at this point, I don't have anyone else in the waiting room. I will note that you received 2 written comments for citizens to be heard, one from Lisa Carter and one from Laura Duressery. And then I believe there were 4 written comments that came in for the public hearing.
Okay, that's coming up next. All right. Thank you, Summer. We will move on to the public hearing. And so I'm going to call this public hearing to order at 7:03 p.m. And this public hearing is regarding the location of construction of pickleball courts. And is Annie here?
I do not have Annie yet.
Okay, well, my understanding is that the public hearing is regarding the location of the construction of pickleball courts, and in your packet, there's quite a bit of information on the process that was presented to a committee of folks that were working on determining the best location for the pickleball courts, and it's being recommended that they be constructed at Old City Park. And so we're going to open up the public hearing for comments on the location of the new pickleball courts. And there's Annie, and I hope I conveyed that appropriately. But if you could, Summer, go ahead and bring on the folks that want to talk about pickleball.
I don't have anyone in the waiting room besides Jake and Judy.
Okay. So should we wait a little longer, or should I go ahead and close the public hearing? Or do we want to keep it open for, 10 minutes, or how does the council want to move forward? Ronnie?
Mayor Dave used to leave them open, at least sometimes for the entire meeting, and given the electronic format, sometimes would allow more time for comments, but I think it would be helpful, especially since the agenda changed and people might have been confused and we already lost 5 citizens to be heard, that we leave it open longer in case somebody pops back in because they're confused about when this is going to happen.
The only problem with that is the next item on the agenda is consideration of the location of the pickleball court. So if we leave,
I could make a motion to move that item to the end of our agenda just to allow some more time.
I don't know that I want to move it to the end of the agenda. But if you'd like to make that motion, we can see where it goes, or we can, because the next item on the agenda is consideration of the location of construction of the pickleball course. But before we do that, Ronnie, let's open it up for discussion for Annie. So does anybody have any questions for Annie on this agenda item? And then I'll call for a motion. Ronnie?
So Annie, I know you're going to talk about this. So can you just touch when you talk about other locations that people may not see on this chart, like some of the ones I've gotten questions about, or the sun court and the ball fields? That would be great. Thanks.
Annie, go ahead.
Oh, well, I have a presentation, but I was going to do that. I guess I can do it now as part of the public hearing. And so we were going to have Rick Davidson and Patty Jones join us. I don't know if they're in the waiting room. They were on the committee and wanted to speak from their perspective as well, but I'm not sure if we lost them or not.
We did lose them. Rick was in the waiting room earlier. I didn't see Patty, but I don't have them in the waiting room right now.
Okay. Well, I have a quick presentation to give you some background information, and then we can either open for discussion.
Okay, that sounds great, Annie. Thank you.
Great. So I don't know if you can make me the presenter.
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. All right. So for the pickleball court location, so about a year ago, the city applied for and was successful in getting a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. We had preliminary approval for $80,000 in grant funds that we would need to match with at least 50% for a project cost of $160,000. But I do want to point out that this is a very low confidence cost estimate, given that the grant application was over a year ago, and with construction costs, we think this might be low at this point. And two things that are really important when we get into the discussion of location is that for this grant source, it has a lot of restrictions. The first being is that the city must own the land or have an easement in perpetuity. And also, so if this recreation activity is ever relocated, we would need to purchase new land of equal size that must be purchased at fair market value. So we want to make sure that it's at a location that's permanent. So required to get our final grant approval, the first is we need to obviously select our site, come up with a site design and detailed cost estimate breakdown. And then we do need to go through some environmental, archaeological, and environmental justice review. So in the location selection process, this was guided by a change of use real city property policy that was adopted a few years ago. we decided that we would have a selection committee that would help make this dissection, have very specific selection criteria, and then bring it back to a public hearing where we are this evening. And all of this, of course, is subject to the NPS approval. They are the granting source. So the selection committee, we had 2 representatives from the Moab Pickleball Club. So that was Patty and Rick. We also had an outside park professional who has experience in building and operating these pickleball courts. And that was Tiff Miller, who used to work here. And the committee's process was to finalize the criteria, discuss any proposed sites, conduct site visits, rank the location, and then present our recommendation. And so this is not a comprehensive list of locations. We brainstormed all sorts of possibilities, and these are the ones that kind of got the final serious consideration. So that was Swanee Park, Old City Park, the golf course, and then maybe utilizing some land next to the tennis courts at the high school. And we went through criteria like land ownership, parking, restrooms, how close it was to town, if it was compatible with uses, if we could expand in the future. And also we didn't want to eliminate any existing uses in our parks. And so by the process, the Old City Park was the one that had met all the criteria. And it's also a beautiful location.
So are you done?
I am done.
Okay, great, thank you. And so the two folks, Annie, that were on Citizens to be Heard, were going to speak in favor of your recommendation, do you know?
Yes, they were. I mean, I think that there was other areas that they wanted to consider and maybe had some other favorites, but they did not meet the criteria for the grant application.
Right, gotcha. Okay, if you could go ahead and unshare your screen and we'll open it up for questions from the council.
Yes, hold on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin.
The chart shows that the golf course is not owned by the city. My understanding is it is owned, but leased to the Moab Golf Club. Just wondering if that was understood and if that was factored into the consideration.
Yeah, that was factored in. The area that we were looking at in consideration, we own most of it, but the parking lot and the clubhouse, the land that is on is not city owned.
Mayor, I did have Rick Davidson pop into the waiting room when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the council for Annie? And let's go ahead and let Rick come on.
Okay, he should be joining.
Rick, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was late. I was listening to it on YouTube and I think we got behind or something. But listen, thank you so much for giving us this time. I'm not sure that what was said beforehand, so I just want to make a couple of comments if I could. I know that I think it was Rainey that sent a letter, I think just with some concerns about the location and maybe a few little misconceptions as far as the sport of pickleball. We have had, it's a very diverse sport, and we have anywhere from 16-year-olds to 80-year-olds playing, which is fun. But I think the one thing that I think, again, I didn't hear what was said before. So, we had a couple locations in mind. We looked at, the golf course that didn't work out with the grant, and Old City Park just seems to be a good location. Now, I know it's not within the city limits, but one of the things about pickleball, and I know that anybody that has played or has been around it, it is a little bit noisy. And so I think the concern of having pickleball, let's just say at the baseball fields or at Swanee Park or something along that lines, it can be a little bit noisy. So the one thing about Old City Park is that where it's at, there's not a lot of residential properties around there. And I do think that it is one of those spaces that for the amount of money that we have, I do think that it works out perfectly. And, I've played pickleball in a lot of other places. In fact, I live part of the year in Gunnison, Colorado, and we built pickleball courts there in a park that is in a neighborhood. And, it didn't take long for the people in the neighborhood to say, please wait until at least 8 o'clock in the morning to play. So there is a little bit of a noise issue with pickleball. And so again, I think Old City Park would be wonderful. A prime location, obviously, that isn't going to work right now would be over, where the tennis courts are at the school, but obviously the city doesn't own that property. But that is a nice location. So I think all the people, at least the local people, would be pretty happy with Old City Park. And just on a side note, pickleball is, it's still the fastest growing sport in America. And so when we have people from all over the place that are coming and playing pickleball that are visiting Moab. And so a lot of people that play pickleball seek out towns that have pickleball. And so you may not see the monetary aspect of pickleball right away, but there are people coming here to play. And the one thing about pickleball is they want to play with the local people. And so it's a very social sport. And we have, honestly, we've had jeepers, mountain bikers, hikers. I mean, you name whatever has come to Moab, they're coming and playing pickleball, and they're seeking out places to play. So having pickleball courts in Moab would truly be an asset. And for all of us that are playing here, we're very excited about the prospect of it.
Great.
And I guess that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other people in the room that were?
Not at this time.
All right. Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and close this public hearing at 7:16. And next on the agenda is consideration of the location of construction of a pickleball court. And I'm going to ask for a motion. Kaylin?
I move that staff continue to pursue construction of pickleball courts at Old City Park, utilizing the federal grant that is available.
I'll second.
Motion made by Kaylin, seconded by Tawny. Kaylin, any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I'm modifying the recommended motion a little bit. I mean, I'm supportive of it, but it seems like the federal criteria, part of it's just driving the location. And so should the cost turn out to be a lot more and like the calculus about how it's funded change, I don't want to be everyone to be locked in on Old City Park if that changes. Hopeful that it won't, but
thank you.
Hence the reason.
That is something that the committee did talk about, is that we didn't want to make a decision that was funded or that was driven by the funding. But in the end, we felt that, or the committee felt that if we didn't accept this grant now, pickleball courts as a reality in Moab would be years down the road, and there just doesn't stop us from building future courts somewhere else.
Tawny, do you have any comment?
No.
Okay. Anybody else on the council? Ronnie?
So Annie, for people who asked, since for these one or two things that weren't on the chart, only because I had specific questions about them, for like the Sun Court, people have discussed the ball field, so I think we've covered that. But like for the Sun Court and the Old Spanish Trail Arena, which I think is owned by the county, so that's probably one reason it wouldn't have been considered. Was there anything about the Sun Court that people should know?
Yeah, well, for the Sun Courts right now, it's a smaller space. We're looking to build 4 permanent courts that wouldn't fit right in that Sun Court area. We also kind of appreciate the multi-use that the Sun Court gets. People still play basketball. They've had, civic events there in the past, so we didn't want to eliminate it for this opportunity.
Okay, yeah, and I just thought I should acknowledge, because I know we all hear from residents, I wanted to thank the 4 people who sent us written comments about this. And I did want to acknowledge a request from one resident who said they live near Old City Park and they're okay with the location, but they were curious if we're anticipating lighting, and if so, if we could commit to making sure that that was motion related lighting, just because of the dark skies out there, so they don't have to worry about lights being on all night.
Yeah, I would say for the scope of this grant and funding source, lighting would not be an option, and it would probably obviously have to be vetted through a pretty big process if that were to happen in the future.
Okay, well, I just wanted to get, that request out there. And then just also thank the residents who mentioned the concern about, the distance from town, especially for seniors who don't have cars, and, realizing that we do have sustainability goals as a city, and we're kind of forcing some seniors into a car potentially. And then hopefully they just understand at this time, given the city property that we have to choose from, we just don't have anything closer that was viable. But I did want to acknowledge people and say thank you for sending that. And I just wanted to thank staff for working on this, because I know that there is a strong interest in pickleball. And I just wanted to clarify too, since there was the comment about a Rainey writing a letter, and sometimes people think that's how you pronounce my name. That was not me. So go Pickleball.
Jason.
So I was going to ask, and I could be totally missing something. Did we get written comments sent to us? Did I miss them somewhere in an email? Okay.
And we can help you figure out how to get them, Jason.
I'm trying to figure out where I'm going on stuff.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
there's a place in Google Drive, but yeah, we can walk you through that. There were 4 in the public hearing and 2 in the citizens to be heard, and there's a shared folder, but yeah, we can help you.
all right. No, I agree with Kaylin's motion. I would like to see him in town, but I understand Old City Park. I had a chance to speak with some of the people in the pickleball community, and they kind of echoed that same sentiment, that they wish they were in town, but Old City Park seemed like it was a pretty good place for it and stuff. So, I thought, 4 is all at once is great, but is there any thought about building pocket courts, or 2 courts in one place and 2 courts in another place? But I understand the benefits of having, it's probably cheaper to build 4 courts, in one place and have it in one area. So I think it's good. It's something that needs to happen. I just wish it was in town.
So Annie, can the pickleballers still use Sun Court and the gym if they want to?
Oh yes, I anticipate they'll continue to use the high school tennis courts, Sun Court, and the gym.
So people can go out to Old City Park, but there's other options in town for people if they want to get a group together to play. So to address that concern that you all have. Luke, do you have any comment?
Not a ton. I've played a couple of games of pickleball with the community, and the 4 courts make sense. As it's been alluded to, it very much is a community kind of activity, and I know that people rotate games and like switch up teams amongst them, and so having all 4 courts in one place really helps kind of facilitate that community activity and atmosphere.
Great, thanks, Luke. And just full disclosure, my husband is an avid pickleballer, and I know that somebody in the community is concerned that this whole agenda item is because I'm married to a pickleballer. So I just want you to know that that's not the case, but I wanted everybody to know that my husband is he's a part of that community in a big way. So anyway, if there's not any other discussion, I'm going to call for the motion to Kaylin's motion. to consider the location for the pickleball court. Kaylin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Tawny,
Aye.
Jason, Luke,
Aye.
Ronnie.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item is consideration of an agreement between Moab Irrigation Company and the City of Moab. And this is another really cool thing. Annie, if you want to go.
Yeah, this is another fun one. So I think it was late summer where Mike Duncan and the Moab Irrigation Company approached the city about installing a water feature at Rotary Park. There's an existing drainage. It's actually drainage makes it sound unattractive, but it's lined with boulders. And it goes from the parking lot down to the creek, and they are willing to have us have water at free of charge during the irrigation season. We do have, we'll share the installation costs, which we think will be pretty nominal minus labor or staff labor. And I think it'll be just a great amenity for the park.
Questions for Annie on this item?
I just wanted to thank Annie and the members of the Moab Irrigation Company, and also the water department, because I understand, you know, they've agreed to take this on, and I know they already have so much going on. So thank you.
Any other questions from council? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve an agreement between Moab Irrigation Company and the City of Moab regarding the Rotary Park Moab Irrigation Company water feature.
All right.
Second.
All right. Motion made by Kaylin, seconded by Jason. Any discussion, Kaylin?
Nope.
Jason?
Nope.
Anybody else on the council? All right. All in favor? Oh, roll call vote. Kaylin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
And Luke?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Nice work. All right. Next item, ordinance number 2022-02, authorizing the transit project for federal funding. We need to get Chuck and Mark on the call.
I don't have either one of them yet.
All the next three items are Chuck and Mark.
Yes, I'm sure they're watching Oli in the waiting room in a sec.
All right.
I've texted Chuck.
I'd just like to add on that last item, if I may, that I
Sure.
really appreciated having an agreement with pictures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so it was nice having an agreement that maybe wasn't totally drafted by attorneys with graphic aids.
Great.
I agree. The form of that agreement was definitely how I like to see them.
Yeah. Nice job, Annie. Please let her know of that comment. That'd be great. All right, we've got the Cosmos here and Mark. There he is.
I don't have Chuck yet, but I'll keep watching for him.
Mark, are you able to discuss the transit project, the ordinance number 2022? I know that Chuck was on this item and you were on the next one, but are you able to begin that conversation?
Yeah, I could probably start it for us here.
Okay.
I've got him. Hold tight.
All right. Thanks, Summer. Okay. Chuck, are you with us?
I'm with you. Sorry about that. I was caught up in YouTube world.
Okay. I know you're not the only one. All right. We're ready to go. Mark was going to get started, but since you're here, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. The agenda item is to pass an ordinance that will allow staff to go out to procurement for the transit operator, and will also set up the scenario whereby the mayor can sign other certifications that are required in order to comply with the Federal Transit Authority funds that we want to get as part of this project. Project being, of course, the transit shuttle program, pilot program. I'd be happy to go into as much detail on that ordinance as you like, but that's a summary. The contract was signed last year with UDOT for a betterment agreement to receive $1.5 million worth of UDOT funds The city and county commit on the order of 700,000, and then we're looking for about 400,000 of Federal Transit Authority funds over this 5-year pilot program. And this ordinance was prepared by our attorney to allow us to move forward. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Chuck? Ronnie?
So Chuck, thanks for, and if this helps anyone else, I had Chuck confirm for me that the intention of this pilot is still for it to remain free for riders for at least the first few years, because if you read the ordinance or just the documents, you'll see that there is a reference to council setting a fee schedule. So I just wanted to make sure we're still there. So thank you, Chuck. And just another question. There are some references to the fixed route, and that'll happen if and when, depending on demand. So can you just remind us, Chuck, like I take it that'll be up to the operator, and they'll have some criteria to decide that demand is at a level to trigger the fixed route portion of this? Thanks.
Yeah, actually, Ronnie, you're right. Demand will trigger it, but it'll be our decision, and that'll be contained in the request for proposals when we go out for the vendor. And in fact, talking with shuttle operators in the community, we think there's going to be interest in both the microtransit and the fixed route sooner rather than later. And we have meetings. We've had several meetings with UDOT, who administer the Federal Transit Authority funds. And we have one later this week where we're trying to get some ARPA money or some CRISA money that may be available to be a little bit more of a shot in the arm of those federal funds that would allow us to do the fixed route perhaps next year. I'm not promising that, but if we could do that, we would do that. Otherwise, the intent is to gain data from year one from the microtransit that'll help us set up the fixed route. But I think we know enough to do that if we had the funding for the to do so.
Anything else, Ronnie? Nope. Anybody else on the council? Questions for Chuck? All right, I'll ask for a motion. Ronnie?
I move to approve ordinance number 2022-02, amending the City of Moab Municipal Code to authorize a transit pilot project, authorizing the mayor to sign various certifications, and authorizing procurement for system operators, and authorize the mayor to sign it.
Motion made by Ronnie, second.
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. Any discussion, Ronnie? No, Luke? Nope. Anybody else on the council? All right, roll call vote. Ronnie, how do you vote?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Kaylin?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Connie?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item. Resolution 02-2022, adopting the policies in connection with the Moab Area Transit Pilot Project for federal funding. Mark or Chuck? Mark.
That'll be me, yeah. So this is just for the purposes of being eligible for some of those grant monies. We've got to sort of establish the groundwork of ourselves as a transit agency. So these documents just set that groundwork. The resolution was written by our attorney, Chris McEnany, and the exhibits contained as attachments to it were all developed by our consultant, Darren Pierce. And they've, we've looked at it. We think it's good.
Great. Questions for Mark? Jason?
No.
No? Tawny? Nope. I'm just looking at your mute buttons. And so if you're unmute, I call on you. So just so you know. Anybody else? Questions for Mark? Ronnie?
So thanks, guys. I understand these are required to qualify for FTA funding, which is cool. So I understand a lot of it's probably just blanket language, like the stuff that we get on Title VI. I did want to point out to people, Title VI covers individuals on the basis of discrimination on race, color, and national origin. There's also, of course, a policy here on ADA. And we have some write-ups on EOE. However, in discussing with staff, I was just comparing what we have in our employee hiring policy under EOE for the city. And also, I have conversations in the community with people about inclusion. And so I did get the impression from staff that if I wanted to be certain that other groups of people were protected from discrimination, that I should probably raise that. And so some of the groups that I don't see covered here that we certainly mentioned in our EOE policy when we hire people at the city include discrimination based on, say, religion, age, gender identity, sexual orientation. There are a number of them. And so I am just interested in maybe staff reiterating to me what it would take to make sure, because these are members of our community, and I feel like I want them to be able to feel like they're stepping onto transit with the same protection from discrimination as other groups. Not that I anticipate any discrimination, but I do feel like since we're discussing it, so maybe if staff can just help me understand what that would take.
Yes, so I believe that the EOE policy here was reflects our city policy. So I'm sure we could update this one to include that language if we needed to.
I would appreciate that, especially because, yeah, these are groups who are members of our community, and I believe they should be included.
Anybody else have questions for Mark? Ronnie?
I'm sorry, I do have more because I did read this stuff carefully. So one of the provisions, I know Chuck, in the last item you just mentioned, going after potential ARPA funding, and I just wanted to make sure there is something, I think, I don't know, I'm gonna have to find it, but there was something written in here that asked us if we had gone after any other federal funding for MAT, for Moab Area Transit. And so if we want to go after FTA and they're asking us, have you gone after underfunding, does that preclude us from then going after those ARPA funds, because aren't they federal as well? Or did I misunderstand that clause?
Yeah, I think that, so UDOT is the distributor of the federal funds. There's a group in the UDOT, and they're the ones who brought up that there are Federal Transit Authority ARPA funds, which have never existed before. So these are, like, ARPA had some cutouts for sewer, they had some cutouts for housing. This is a cutout for Federal Transit Authority, and that's what they're trying to see, is if we can qualify for some of those, but they still want the same language. So it would not be a penalty for us. It's all FTA funds.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure one form of funding doesn't preclude the other. And then I noticed in the documents, there are a few places where Fair and Peers noted that we should have our attorneys look, say, at the procurement section or the ADA section. So I didn't know, is that yet to happen, or did we already do that?
It's been reviewed by our attorneys. It's been reviewed by Human Resources. It was reviewed by UDOT. They're good. We'll fix those typos, plus add in the language we discussed a couple of moments ago about expanding the EOE, but it's been reviewed.
Okay, and then at some point, so I know, thanks for explaining to me, because there are mentions in here about how we use Moab Valley Multicultural Center for translation services, and that we do compensate them for that. I know we had a resident running for mayor who had made comments in their campaign that the city overuses the Multicultural Center for that sort of thing. So I didn't know, maybe, and I'm happy to follow up, but if anyone knows if we actually use anyone else for that aside from MBMC.
I don't know about the city using anyone else, and I can only tell you that in my experience with them, they've always been quite helpful, and mainly we use them on my experience with Walnut Lane, and they've been very, very helpful. But also in our RFP for the vendor, we're going to require them to have LAP proficiency as well.
Okay,
so
thanks.
That's how.
Okay, yeah, thanks for addressing that. Thanks.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve resolution number 02-2022, adopting policies in connection with the Moab Area Transit Pilot Project, and authorize the mayor to sign it.
Second? Seconded by Ronnie.
I'll second.
Kaylin, any further discussion?
Nope, just glad to see this moving forward. Thanks,
Yeah.
staff, for your work on this.
Ronnie, any discussion? No? Anybody else? Jason? No?
Just for my clarification, we don't need to like amend the motion to include the extra language to like mirror the city's discrimination language.
Well, we could amend, would you like to amend the motion to make sure that the policy includes the language that reflects the city policy?
Sure, I move to amend the motion to reflect the city's discrimination policy.
Okay, we have an amendment to the motion. Ronnie, are you okay with that amendment?
Yes, thanks for catching that.
All right. I guess I should ask you, Kaylin, are you okay with that amendment?
Yes, I am.
All right, very good. All right, anybody else? Thanks, Luke. All right, roll call vote. Kaylin,
Aye.
Ronnie,
Aye.
Luke,
Aye.
Tawny,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
motion passes unanimously. All right, Chuck, stay on, because now our next item is approval of an MOU to develop a water utility resource management plan. And I'm assuming that you heard Mike Duncan's comments and citizens to be heard. So perhaps in your presentation, you can address those issues that he brought up.
Sure. Carly, do you want to start or shall I go ahead?
Yeah, I just have a brief kind of overview, and then Chuck has been the one to shepherd so much of this work so far. The only thing is, just by way of introduction, the impetus behind this effort has been the real acknowledgement, I think, amongst everyone in the community that the water situation is a serious one here in the Moab Valley, and we want to get a better understanding about the issue. This would require closer coordination with the other public water systems which share the resource that we all use, meaning the aquifer as well as surface water too. And what we want to do is to take steps to integrate our land use and our water resource management. So that is the spirit and intention behind this effort. Before you, and I apologize, Chuck, if I'm going to repeat what you say, what we have an MOU before you, which describes simply the cost sharing situation between the city and GWISA and San Juan County to ensure that everyone is pitching in to this effort to pay for the studies that we have in mind. Additionally, we've included a scope of work for this work, so you understand what we have in mind, and as we can also give feedback on that scope of work. The contract has not been signed yet, so that's still something we can negotiate. It's been reviewed by San Juan County, by Grand County, by GWISA so far. So we have done a lot of work up till now for you to consider. So with that, Chuck, take it away.
Thanks, Carly. I thought it might be good to spend a few minutes on what the plan is about. I mean, I think the MOU is pretty straightforward in discussing it as Carly's described. And I think in the agenda summary, we talked about how we selected our qualified consultant to do the work. I'd like to talk for a few minutes about the plan, and I'd just like to pull up my, share my screen for a moment. I'm assuming you can see that.
Yes.
Great. Why this plan now? Plans are the basis of providing direction for the future, utilizing existing data and considering potential future needs and conditions. And just as a quick, the reason we're able to move forward on our sewer projects and on our water infrastructure projects, and in fact, on our stormwater project in Stewart Canyon this last couple of years with UDOT, is because we had master plans that address those needs. And this plan will address other needs as I described herein. We don't have this type of plan This will be the first comprehensive evaluation of surface and groundwater resources in the valley. There's been science done, but there's been no planning. This is the difference between the USGS doing science, our consultant, Dr. Combe, doing science, and taking that science and moving forward and putting together a plan that gives us a guidance. Why would we do this as the city? We're a municipal water provider. GWSA, Grand Water Sewer Services Agency, is a special services district, same as San Juan County has. And the Utah Safe Drinking Water Act gives us a multitude of authorities and responsibilities. And there's just a quote there, is one of them is to be resilient and proactive and talk about what we're going to do for water into the future. And I'll say that regardless of how many tourists come to the valley, I believe, and I think Utah, the Division of Drinking Water, believes it's a responsible thing for us to consider how best to use this water resource we have into the future. It's also going to incorporate existing hydrogeologic and hydrologic knowledge and options. And it's supported by a coalition of the 3 major water supply providers. And by the way, we have included Moab Irrigation Company, but GWSA essentially controls most of their shares, and that's why they're signing on the MOU. And also the Utah Division of Water Rights and their state engineer supports this plan because it's a holistic approach to addressing water resource management in the valley. Specifically, what tasks does the plan include? Water planning needs at 20, 50, and 100-year timeframes. We'll evaluate ground and surface water options. Yes, there is a connection between, both John and Mike talked about surface water a bit and groundwater, but they haven't been evaluated as fully as this plan will do in terms of availability as a resource to achieve the goals that the 2 counties and the city have for the types and quantities of water. And just for new members of council, when I say types of water, we have culinary water, which is our drinking water. Then we have the secondary water, which is the irrigation water. And the city only uses we use our culinary water for irrigation water as well. So there's opportunities to use the appropriate type of water for the appropriate application in an improved manner into the future. And we'll look at that and come up with scenarios that would help that. It'll consider general plans, population projections. It'll certainly consider the effects of drought and climate change, as John suggested. That's built into the scope of work. We'll evaluate alternatives of sharing water resources. Council will be before you in the next 6 months. We're going to be putting together, again, a couple of interconnect plumbing arrangements, if you will, with GWSA, whereas if part of our system goes down and they have the ability to share some of their water during, say, a power outage or a fire or something breaks, then we'd be able to do the same thing back. So in a valley as small as ours, it only makes sense to really maximize our ability to share water resources in a fair manner and an open manner. The plan will give us a design of alternatives with cost estimates. We'll end up with an implementation plan. And that's my reference earlier to the plan set the stage for projects, whether or not they're policy projects or whether or not they're construction projects, which I imagine some of this will be. That plan gives you that. And public engagement is built within this within this scope of work that we have before you, as well as stakeholder involvement. I mean, no one has suggested we're doing this behind closed doors. We're not doing it behind closed doors. If council approves the MOU, we'll engage the public, we'll engage stakeholders, as well as the other agencies that may have an interest. And almost done, Mayor. What will the plan provide? It's going to be a business plan that the coalition will use to ensure water supply. That's one of the things I'd encourage council, and I've done in the past, is to think about, we're a municipal water provider. As an enterprise fund, we have obligations, authorities, and responsibilities, and thinking of this as a business plan still allows us to consider lots of things that might not be money related, but it still provides a framework for that. It's not a research project. We don't think that we need to bring in a lot more science for this. There's enough information out there. We may disagree among some of us out there, but there's a lot of agreement that there is enough information. And we're also going to put together a plan that doesn't ignore or blame other providers or jurisdictions for water issues in the valley, since it's all inclusive. It's a small valley, our aquifers are shared. We think it's an opportunity to get beyond these political differences and really look at the resource as a shared resource. It'll fill an existing void. Like I said, there is no plan in existence. We think it's time to do so, the coalition and city staff. And I think, to me, maybe as important as anything is this final statement is it's a locally led collaborative effort that's based on science, public engagement, and an implementable plan that provides a guide to managing the resource for 100 years. And the locally led is what I think is important. This is not a state mandated plan. It's not a federal mandated plan. It's led by the communities who are the closest level to the people, special services districts, the city and the county governments, and we'll be in charge of our water resource for the future. I kind of went through that quickly. I'll stop sharing my screen, but I wanted to kind of hit on an overview of what the plan itself would do, since the MOU, I think, is, as Carly described it, fairly straightforward. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So Chuck, just for clarification purposes, this is just the approval of an MOU to begin the process with the local entities that would be involved to start developing the plan. And I assume that council members would be allowed to participate in that process.
Oh, development of the plan?
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, you would have to be
right
part of any. I mean, it's going to be both information gathering and sort of a study in that way. We're going to be evaluating water rights, everyone else's system, but any sort of policy that comes out of it would have to be approved by not only the council, but the other governmental bodies. It's similar to what we have in mind for this community vision effort that we're launching, where it's a staff, staff is the project manager, staff is sort of the main project team, but it's absolutely getting approved and run through the legislative bodies. So it's a similar kind of idea.
Yeah, if I may quickly add to that, I mean, there was an implication made that staff doesn't lead these things. I'm your technical advisor. You're the city council's the legislative body. You set policy. So staff knows that. I've got 30 years in this business of local government. We know that. We're not trying to do anything, usurp anyone's authority, just to be quite blunt about it. Didn't appreciate the suggestion that we were.
Jason.
Is Grand Water and Sewer and San Juan already signed on to this? Are they on board with it?
Their managers have all agreed to this and have been with us developing the scope of work and the MOU. They haven't signed the document first because we're going to lead the effort because we're the largest water user in the valley. So, but they have all agreed at the staff level, and they have been talking to their elected officials, and we believe that they're on board. Yes.
Anything else, Jason? No. Kaylin, you had a question or so?
Well, I appreciate that there's a public engagement component, but it seems like the visioning process is likely to be far more robust in that regard. And it may inform some of the generate information about the goals of the community regarding what our valley looks like, and which could relate to priorities for water use, and hence the types of water that is developed, the relative ratio. So I'm supportive of the MOU. I think there's a lot of potential value to come out of this, and the MOU does just set up the framework for that to happen. So I have no question about that. This is just addressing the specifics of the scope And so they anticipate completion within 180 days of the notice to proceed, so it seems like I'm not sure what the current time frame is for the visioning process or the Grand County general plan, but it seems like with 6 months, it could goal setting and alternative development could precede significant output from those other processes, at least, especially the city visioning. So I'm just wondering about, I think it's important that the process starts soon. We may as well get it going. And it seems like the first phases are just gathering data, and legal analysis, technical analysis, which is all great. But I'm just wondering about lengthening the process a little bit so that the visioning process has an opportunity to inform some of the later work.
Yeah, Kaylin, I don't know if you saw my answer to your question. So
I did. I'm partly saying it for the benefit of the council and the public.
And I guess if I can respond the same way, we think it's a great opportunity to get more public engagement through the visioning process. And I think that you're right. We can extend that time frame. The truth of the matter is 180 days is pretty tight to get that plan done. And Carly is well engaged with this, and I believe I'm involved with the visioning process too. So we'd have plenty of opportunity to make sure that we take advantage of those opportunities to maximize that goal setting and public involvement. So the answer is yes, we can do that, and we will do that. And if we approve that contract, they'll develop a schedule that'll be more realistic with specific dates.
Great.
Carly?
It's a great insight, and I really appreciate it, because I think that the interaction between the two efforts is very important. And just as a reminder, we're thinking of like an October completion date for the community visioning, so it doesn't have to stretch too much longer. I think it lines up pretty close.
Okay.
Thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions for Chuck? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the water utility resource. Oh, Ronnie?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions. I was just letting everyone else go in case somebody asked the same ones. I was curious, have colleagues read the January 15th letter from the chair of the Moab City Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board, Arnie Holquist?
I did.
Knowing that this plan, has been negotiated with GWISA and San Juan, has the plan gone in front of the advisory board? The MOU, sorry.
No.
Okay, is that an option for us as a council to ask that it go before the advisory board first? Because as I understand it, we were responsible as a body for creating that board, and it's the mission of the board to advise us on things like this. And so is that an option for us to send it to them first?
I think with the MOU, that's like a funding question strictly, but we can talk about, do you mean the scope of work?
Yeah.
Perhaps, so not the MOU. Those are two separate things.
Right.
Well,
they are. The MOU is just to proceed forward with the water resource management plan. It's not the plan itself.
Right. It's how you are going to divvy out the costs simply.
And I wouldn't think we would need that advisory committee to give us that advice at this point.
Right. But then there's also the scope of work, which might be appropriate for their review. I think that is a fine idea, and I expect they'd be very engaged in this process too, as our advisory board.
Okay, so the next question is, who exactly is on the Water Providers Coalition? Who are the members? I tried to look, I can't find any information that lists that for the public.
So is that part of this MOU, Ronnie?
Oh yes, the coalition drew up the MOU.
Yeah.
It's very important that our council understand that.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, so it's the Grand Water Sewer Services Agency and the
But
San Juan Special Services District. And it also includes San Juan County and Grand County and the city of Moab.
yeah, but for the public, who are the members who attend the meetings? There are no elected officials attending these meetings, correct?
No.
And
I mean, like
are
the
we
project
permitted to know who the members are who attend meetings and represent us?
So you mean like the project management meetings, the technical management meetings?
When the coalition meets, which in our water conservation plan update, it tells us they've been meeting since July. How do we know as the public who's attending those meetings?
Oh, you mean like okay, Chuck, you might be able to give insight about the regular meetings we have with GWISA and San Juan County about water issues.
I'm talking specifically about when the Water Providers Coalition meets and when people got together to create this MOU, who was involved.
Sure. So
And
I can answer that.
I'm not just, I'm going to be very clear to you and the public that I'm not just asking this for me. I have had several inquiries from members of the public who feel like this process is not transparent. And so this is related to that.
Sure, I can tell you. So Carly and I have been representing the city. Dana Van Horn and her assistant Dale, I don't remember Dale's last name, have been attending for GWISA. Okay, thank you. Mac McDonald from San Juan County has been attending. And Lloyd, who's the chief operator for San Juan Special Services District, has been attending as well. And in the future, we've invited John Gunther from Grand County to attend.
So he hasn't been attending meetings.
No, they were late sign-ons, but they're on board now and they're included in that scope of work.
And how about the Moab Irrigation Company? You explained that GWISA holds most of their shares. Are they invited to these meetings?
We've tried to invite them and they've not attended. They're such a small group that they're hard to get a hold of. They're more than welcome to attend. Welcome their environment.
And
we welcome them.
What about those members of Grand County who have wells who are, not part of GWISA? Where is their representation?
They're not municipal water providers. So we just went with the largest providers in the valley are far and away there. Those people can participate in the public and stakeholder engagement program that we would do, but they're not municipal water providers. That's why this is called a water utility master plan and not some other type of well owner master plan.
Yeah, it's important because, and this might be important or helpful. We're something called a public water system under the Safe Drinking Water Act and under state statute as well. So we're regulated in a certain way with these other participants, and it's sort of all of our interests. We're coming from the same interest based on those obligations under those statutes, if that makes sense.
So when I read in the documents in our packet about stakeholders, who are those stakeholders?
I think that is to be determined, but I can, like, the ones that come immediately to mind are like MOP, the group that meets, the Moab Area Watershed Partnership. I think this is the part you're referring to, Ronnie. The Water Conservation Board, any sort of, we've gotten some input from someone like John Weissite would be absolutely a stakeholder, like area experts, I would say. That's who I have in mind. Chuck, do you have anyone else?
Yeah, the Conservation Board, the Water Conservation. I think I was just looking in the scope. I thought we actually said a few more, but each coalition member is going to identify additional stakeholders. And like I said, it's open. I agree with John that an open approach is fine.
Yeah, but like I can't go as a member of the public and attend the coalition meetings, right?
Well, I'll let Carly answer it, but there's staff level meetings. We have staff level meetings all the time on all sorts of topics. We don't publish every staff meeting. I don't know into the future, Carly, how you want to handle that.
Yeah,
I think if Ronnie wants to go to the meeting, I'm sure she would be more
Definitely
than
can.
welcome to come to the meeting. And I'm going to kind of ask you to wrap this up, Ronnie. If you have any further questions of staff, I suggest that you reach out.
Yeah, Joette, I'm saying this for the purpose of the public because we as elected officials, it is an understanding of the public that part of the role we play is to look out for the public benefit of their, look out for the public trust of their resources. And I've had several residents ask, who's on this coalition? And I tell them I don't know. So that is the nature of these questions. And I've had several people ask, is it?
I appreciate that. And I think your questions have been answered. And so I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay. I would like colleagues to consider that we have members of the Drought and Water Management Advisory Board look over the scope of work. I think if you guys haven't read it, you need to read it because it deals with things like Colorado River water with city water rights. And we are ultimately, as the city council, responsible for what happens with those water rights. And I also think it's incumbent on us as the city council to understand our water resources and be responsible to educate ourselves more. And there's been talk about having workshops on water at our meetings. And I'm formally asking that those start, and we start with having the Water Advisory Board come and speak to us about Arnie's letter so we can understand the history of how the city formed them, how the city council formed them, and we can understand their expertise and their role and also get their input. And
I believe I addressed that with you, Ronnie, when you asked me that question the other night, and I believe we will be moving forward with that as soon as we can. And so I'm going to call for the question. Do I have a motion to approve the MOU to develop the Water Utility Resource Management Plan?
I'll make a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding with Grand Water Sewer Agency and San Juan County Special Service District to develop water utility resource management plan. Authorize the mayor to sign it.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion, Jason?
No.
Connie?
No.
Kaylin?
As the discussion was going on, I went and looked at the scope, and it did occur to me that at a minimum, it's important that the water rights, the major water rights in the valley, even if they're not of the coalition members, be accounted for. But I suspect that'll happen. I'm supportive.
Luke?
Yeah, sorry. No, I don't have any comments.
Ronnie?
No, I'll be voting against this. It's not, as anybody watching the meeting can see, if we're not going to allow more discussion on it and we're going to cut off discussion, it's not transparent, and more power to those of you who follow them.
Thank you. Call for the question. Jason?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Galen?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Ronnie?
No.
Motion passes 4-1, Ronnie voting nay. All right, there you go. Next item, proposed resolution 03-2022, a resolution authorizing the mayor to sign the amended and restated special use amendment N 1342, a lease with the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, authorizing the use of state lands for police firearms training facility. Ben.
Yeah, I prepared a brief presentation, but it primarily just consists of a couple pictures of the site. It's located just north of the turnoff for Sunny Acres Lane. This is a gated property that's been leased by the city. I found lease agreements. I'm not sure if it was the first lease agreement or if it was also a continuation back to 1983. So we're looking at a 40-year history here. It's currently used by five different law enforcement agencies as essentially a shooting range for ongoing training and certification. And our current 20-year lease agreement which was signed in 2001, or 2002, expired in December. So we're now, that lease agreement had lead remediation requirements within the agreement, built into the agreement. And so essentially the city now has, the staff is recommending that we move forward with essentially a continuation of that prior agreement. The new agreement does contain a few additional stipulations that primarily relates to a lead mitigation study, an environmental assessment, and a study, and then a plan, all which have to be done within the next 2 years. And it's important to note that in this contract, SITLA has the right to terminate after year 5 with 1 year notice. So the remediation cost, so no matter what, when the agreement is terminated, if that's immediately, if the council chose not to renew this agreement, we would have to do the lead remediation right now. So by extending it, what we're doing is we're kind of deferring that requirement for the lead remediation. And if you read the recommendation from our attorney, you'll also see that we are arranging for the other agencies, if they desire, to participate in the share of costs of that lead remediation for the use of the site. Because up until this point, the city has solely paid for the lease of the land and also assumed the liability for that lead remediation when it is due. But what we're going to be doing is approaching those other agencies. So the motion contains language, either the motion or the resolution, sorry, contains language to advise staff to pursue those lease agreements with the other agencies. So with that, I'm open to any questions.
Questions, Jason?
Yeah, so Ben, is it like set up like with like shooting stalls and everything up there? I've never seen it. I'm just wondering, like, when we're doing lead remediation, is it like this big vast area, or is it like set up so that it'd be pretty easy?
So there is a small berm. I can show you a quick picture that I snapped there out on site. So here you can see this is facing east. You can see the highway there on back here. Wait, which screen are you seeing here?
Site location.
Okay.
You've got it right.
This works. Okay, so that you can see the highway running along there, and then on the next screen, next slide, you can see the stalls. So with the shooting bank behind, and then there's a berm built up, and it is entirely possible that with the study that's done, that they recommend either building up the berm even higher. Again, this is a new thing to me. It's not something I've ever undertaken, but I imagine the study that's done will give some recommendations on the site, probably just using equipment that we could do to help contain that lead trap.
Right.
Yeah, and this issue's been an issue for a long time. There's a lot of lead out there. I think it would be an expensive proposition to clean it up. But anyway, that's something that I think we need to look at. Anything else, Jason? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just wondering how big of an area it is. So that answers that. Thanks.
Ronnie?
Ben, I just wanted to thank you for catching this and addressing it, because it's clearly been going on for a while. Yeah, so it's great that you guys caught it and you're getting other folks involved to help pay their share and to start planning for remediation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions for Ben? Then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve Resolution 03-2022, a resolution authorizing the mayor to sign the amended and restated special use lease agreement number 1342. The lease with the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, authorizing the use of state lands for a police firearms training facility.
I'll second it.
Second by Jason. Any further discussion, Kaylin? Jason?
No.
Tawny? Luke? Ronnie? A call for the vote. Kaylin?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
And Ronnie?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item, community organization liaison and board assignments. In your packet, there was a list of all the boards and the council members and the mayor. There's a couple of changes to that I wanted to bring to your attention that it's, and I'd like for us to just approve this list rather than reading the names of everybody and the names of the committees. But there's a couple of changes. I believe Ronnie has requested to go off the EMS board and have Jason be the community or the council city representative. Ronnie?
I just want to clarify in case anyone from EMS is watching, I'm not leaving the EMS board. I am just suggesting that I talked to Jason about it, that he become the official city representative on the EMS board, and that'll free me up a bit so I can spend time on attending QUISA meetings.
So will you be the community representative, Ronnie, or do you still plan to participate, or will they need to find a replacement?
I will still be a board member for them, but for the city's purposes, I don't belong on any city list for their board.
So you'll be a community representative.
Yeah, and I have spoken to the chair about that, and I spoke
Great.
to Jason about it, if Jason's still okay.
Yep, great. And that's kind of the same with me and Tawny. Tawny will be the city representative. I'll be the community representative on the Healthcare Special Service District Board. But with that, Ronnie has agreed to serve on the Grand Water Sewer Agency Board and the Water Administration Board, Control Board. So those are some changes to that list. Another thing that we need to consider, but I'm going to bring this up at another time, is the USU Advisory Board. And it used to be called the Dean's Council, I believe, and they've changed it to the USU Advisory Board. And that board's a little more sophisticated, if you will. We need to make a recommendation to USU, and they will nominate whoever we recommend. And then the president of USU will make the appointment to that board. Currently, it's Mike Duncan. And we have every right to reappoint him to that board as the city representative. But in the meantime, I'm going to send you all the guidelines and the protocols for that advisory board. And if anybody on the council is interested, let me know. And otherwise, I'm going to reach out to Mike and see if he's willing to continue to serve as the city representative on that board. So that'll be coming down the pike. Yes, Ronnie.
Do you know offhand when they meet?
You know, I don't, and I'll send you that. You know, I got Leanna send me the information. I'll send that off to you, and I'll get that specific information. But I'll be sending that to you, and get back to me. Is, you know, look at it, see if it's you're interested, and if you could get back to me as soon as possible, either, you know, that yes, I'm interested. If I don't hear from anybody by the end of next week, I'll reach out to Mike and see if he wants to continue to be our rep, and then we'll put that particular item on our next agenda along with planning and zoning appointments. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the list of organization liaison and board assignments with the changes. Yes, Ronnie.
I'll make a motion, but I had hoped that we would address legislative committee,
right.
just the
Thank
two
you.
remaining voting slots that we have
Thank you.
on the legislative policy committee, but also the city legislative committee. I didn't know if we were planning to continue
Yes.
to have one of those.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I totally forgot. Yeah, Carly, what do we want to do about that?
About the LPC, like our little meeting that we would have for the legislature each year.
Yeah.
It is absolutely up to you. We formed it last year, especially because we had that OHV bill that we were shepherding through the process. So there was definitely a need for that type of time commitment. If folks are interested, we absolutely can accommodate that, at least at a staff level. So
I just wonder, you know, there's not a lot going on this year. Things can pop up. And I'm just wondering if it might be more appropriate, Ronnie, for the full council to have those discussions in a meeting, you know, or if we have to call a special meeting or something to, if an issue comes up that's very significant and impactful. But right now, in our meeting that we had last week with Casey, Hill, there really isn't a whole lot that we can see coming down the pike that's going to be, that we need to be really proactive with. So I'm wondering, you know, if that might be a more effective way to keep the full council in the loop as issues come up rather than having a separate committee. What do you think, Ronnie?
I don't know. I mean, the pros and cons, the way we did it before, yes, we had a bill and we would, if there was a bill coming up that we were concerned about, the committee would text each other. And then I, as kind of the liaison, would let other council members know in a roundup email, you know, every so often. So it's kind of more a question if we feel like it's a service we owe each other for, you know, a group of us, a subgroup of us to be following bills and reporting to the other members or not. And otherwise I can just, if members are interested, they can contact me and I can tell you, you know, where to find the LPC meetings. If you want the daily legislative briefings, where to find those, because we, you know, there's a way to get daily updates from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. And then also the community, the Grand County League of Women Voters has been tracking bills the last few years, and they're happy to share that information with members. And so they're specifically keeping an eye out for bills that will impair local control in the city and Grand County. So I would just say if we don't, you know, keep the group going, then any members, especially the new members, if you want to know, I'm happy to just kind of tell you what I know about what to track.
Ronnie, that would be great. I'd really appreciate that. I think that might be a good way to move forward, particularly for this year. And then Carly and I have been working really closely with the lobbyists, and I certainly will keep the council informed if something pops up that others may not, that you may not be aware of, Ronnie. And if you could just, perhaps, if you find out something, if I find out something that we need council's input on, we can share an email or make phone calls or whatever we need to do. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, the last thing is just, you know, I think for a community our size, we're allowed to have 4 voting members at the Utah League of Cities and Towns Legislative Policy Committee. So I think right now that's me and Carly, and there are 2 open slots. So if somebody is interested in using those votes, yeah, I guess let us know.
Great, thank
you. In
you.
the past, we've designated those people, but I'm sure it can wait. Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so back to the motion. If we can make a motion to approve the community organization liaison board assignments as presented with the changes to EMS service district and the groundwater, sewer, and groundwater administration control board.
Mayor, I wanted to bring up one other potential change.
Sorry. I didn't.
So I'm listed with the UDOT Transit Committee. That has not met yet. I have no attachment to it, and in the interest of distributing board assignments a little more evenly, I'm wondering if anyone else would like to take that on. I have no idea what it is.
It hasn't been officially assigned yet. You're right. I think it was that initial, Kaylin, that was that initial meeting that we attended. You and I were on like several months ago when they were determining the routes.
Oh yeah.
I think that's what it was. So you want to remove yourself from that at this point, and when we, because I don't think we're at that place yet, and then we can assign that staff, that council member when we get to that point.
Sounds good.
All right. So one more time, if anybody would like to make a motion on these assignments as presented, I entertain that right now.
I move to approve the Moab City Council Board and Committee assignments and reappointments with changes as discussed this evening.
Thank you. Second? Second by Tawny. Any further discussion, Kaylin? Tawny?
Nope.
Anybody else? Luke? No? All right, I'll call for the vote. Kaylin?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
Tawny, or Luke?
Aye.
All right, motion passes unanimously. All right, we've got 3 more big items coming up. It is 8:23, and this next one I think might take a little bit of time, but Corey, if you wouldn't mind, if you're still on the call, reaching out to Danny and cue her up, that would be great. Ronnie? You're muted.
Sorry, I think I got confused and thought the sales tax bonds were next, aren't they?
No,
next?
they are. They are. I'm giving Danny a heads up. So the next item on the agenda is consideration to return the proceeds of the Series 2021 sales tax revenue bonds. And so Ben, I'm going to just turn this over to you. I know you have a really good pros and cons presentation to make. We discussed this in our meeting last time as well. So this is the same thing that we discussed regarding revenue bonds for Walnut Lane.
There's a couple slides that I had in addition in response to questions posed by Ronnie. So those will be first. Let me just get that pulled up here. Okay, so I just briefly introduced this as the consideration to return the bond proceeds of the $6.5 million sales tax revenue bonds that were issued in April of 2021. The reason for that issuance was to fund the development of phase 1 and phase 2 of the Walnut Lane project. And there's a multifaceted reason for the consideration of the return of those funds. Primarily because, and we'll touch on this in the pros and cons, but the primary reason is just that there have been, with construction delays, with difficulties with contractors, there's an unknown time frame of the spend down of those funds. We have technically, you have a 3-year time period after bond issuance for the spend down of bond proceeds. However, given that we are in negative arbitrage with our bond proceeds, which basically just means that we are earning less money on the interest than we are paying out in interest. The IRS wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that situation. You just can't make money on the money that you're borrowing. So the first slide that I wanted to touch on was related to what are our current funding sources? And this will be a review for most of you, possibly even Luke and Jason, you may be familiar with this, but I just wanted to go over this to remind what our housing fund revenue sources are. Where are we getting money outside of the bond proceeds to pay for the development for the housing fund, essentially? Everything that goes into Walnut Lane, which is our primary expenditure for a housing fund. It could be used for other things, but nothing has been proposed at this time. So the first and the bulk of the funds contained in the housing fund relate to Wahoo, which was created by a few years ago, and it's contained in Moab Municipal Code Title 17, Chapter 69, Assured Workforce Housing. And I believe Wahoo stands for Workforce Assured Housing Ordinance. Is that right, Kaylin? All right. So the Wahoo Fund, basically when an overnight accommodation is constructed, that entity is required to either construct workforce housing or pay a fee in lieu of that workforce housing. And so we have received a number of payments. I looked through the history today, I think 4 or 5 payments of Wahoo funds, and the current fund balance there is 1.6, just under 1.6 million. So that's the primary source of revenue for the housing fund. In addition to that, as you know, we received through the American Rescue Plan Act, as we've discussed earlier this evening, there's multiple channels where money is being distributed. And the first one that I wanted to mention is the local match program. So this is money that's administered by the governor's office of Go Utah, the former GoEd, and they created a board, and basically they funded a number of projects that were infrastructure, broadband, housing, and the city of Moab was awarded a $613,000 award there with a matching component. So this is essentially grant money. And if we don't proceed, and this is dedicated, I did look into what that money could be used for, and it's very specific to phase 1 of Walnut Lane, constructing 8 units in total. And it's basically as phase 1 has been outlined. So that is ARPA local match. The third component is ARPA NEU, and NEU stands for non-entitlement unit. And this is probably a misnomer. It's just easier than saying the actual, it's the state and local fiscal recovery. They have a big long acronym for it. NEU is just easier for us to use because the city of Moab is a non-entitlement unit. The difference is that entitled cities are large cities. I think there's 3 or 4 of them in the state, and they received money directly from the federal government, whereas all non-entitlement units received money filtered through the state as opposed to directly from the federal government. So we've received half of the first installment of this ARPA NEU money. So we have $315,000 that we received last summer. We anticipate receiving the second installment in June of this year. So that's another $631,000. Now, I think it's important to remember what that money can be used for. It doesn't have to be used on housing. So, and Ronnie asked this question: what is the opportunity cost of dedicating these funds to the housing fund or to the Walnut Lane project? So the intent of ARPA and this non-entitlement unit really the intent of ARPA as a whole is to support families and businesses and maintain vital public services. There's a few other things related to it, but that's the most relevant for us. As we've been discussing how the city could spend this money, we primarily focused on 2 key areas, which were sewer and housing. And we were discussing that before the final, there was a final decision made, which would enable the city to, they're calling it a standard allowance, which would allow us to basically funnel that money into the general fund without having to prove revenue loss. So the question is, does the city have to use that $631,000 to a sewer project or a housing project? The answer is now no, it does not. However, I think it's important, my recommendation would be to still use that money to accomplish what ARPA was set out to do, which is to support families and businesses and maintain vital public services. So here we see that the total available funding is 2.8 million, and that's with a full allocation of that ARPA NEU money. The cost to develop phase 1 with the site improvements and the construction cost is about 2.2 million, which would leave about that $600,000 as available funding, as available as operating money in the housing fund. So I did also want to point out there are future possible funding opportunities. The first one is the 3 remaining projects. These are entitled projects. And I'm not sure, we haven't estimated what the proceeds from the Wahoo Fund would be on these 3 projects, but there is possibly additional funding coming in in the Wahoo program. So the other component is Home ARP. And this is money this is also American Rescue Plan Act money that's being administered by the Office of Homeless Services. So they have $13 million that's available to non-entitlement units that basically by March, they're going to be rolling out a similar grant program. This is the one that Rihanna brought to our attention last meeting through the public comment. I reached out to her after that meeting and she got me in touch with the Office of Homeless Services. And long story short, they feel that this project, phase 2 of Walnut Lane, would be a great project that would be eligible for a portion of this $13 million. So that would be really neat to be able to take advantage of ARPA again with phase 2, but again, that's not a guarantee. So the next stay that these are now we're moving into slides that were emailed to council, so I'm not going to dive into these really deeply. The question that's being put in front of you tonight is to whether or not to return the proceeds of the bond. And I think the one thing that I wanted to highlight with this is that first con is public perception of project failure. I think there's a lot of emotion tied to this project in the city, and I think it's important to remember that returning the bond proceeds certainly is not ringing the death knell of the project. This isn't basically saying that it's done and won't be able to happen. I think what it is doing, if we go to the pros side, is it's relieving some of that time constraint pressure. It's also disassociating phase 1 from phase 2 and allowing the city to move forward with phase 1 and gain that experience, basically get that experience under our belt. And we can reevaluate the project feasibility. We can reanalyze the financing structure for phase 2 and 3 after phase 1. And basically after phase 1, we could consider the merits of a master lease arrangement. I think that it would be a good time to do that. If the city had a great experience with constructing phase 1 and felt like we could mirror that again with phases 2 and 3, then maybe we continue with the same process there. If it was not a great experience, then the city could move to a master lease arrangement. Another question that was posed is, does returning the bond proceeds affect the city's creditworthiness or credibility? I did want to touch on this because I mentioned it in the last meeting. And I was confusing. We had talked to Zions Public Finance about the return of bond proceeds a few months ago. It was actually longer than that. And we had talked about different options. One of those options was deferring payment on the bond proceeds. And that's where we ran into the concern of creditworthiness and credibility. At this point, if we return the bond proceeds, there would be no concern with creditworthiness. We would be able to reissue a bond at market rate in the same time frame that we would issue any other bond. So it's not really a concern. You know, the purchaser of the bond, they've been paid interest and they've accrued interest that if we did pay this money back, if the council chose to move that direction, you know, they would have earned interest on that money at the stated rate. So that's really not a concern. There are a few pros in retaining the bond proceeds. The first of which is there is some administration time in the bond application process. We have flexibility. That's simply relating to having cash in the bank. You can move quickly when you have money, and you can make, you know, if you could take advantage of a situation in a market. If you wanted to move quickly onto phase 2, you could do that. Whereas there's going to be a little bit of a time delay with having to restructure the financing of phase 2. Interest rates are unknown. That's, you know, 2.38% is a pretty good rate. And the cons of retaining the bond proceeds, the financing costs. So it's undesirable to have an outstanding bond without known spend down time. And we really do. We have the ability to pay cash for phase 1 if desired by council. It also limits, retaining those bond proceeds limits the ability to easily pivot the strategy between phases 1 and 2. Because basically what this would do, if we return the bond proceeds, we would move forward with construction of phase 1. After that, the council would face another decision point at phase 2. You would say, okay, which direction do we want to go now? Whereas currently, it's a little bit more married with the bond, the way that it's structured right now. So I think I've rambled enough about bond proceeds, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the council has.
Thanks, Ben. Very comprehensive. Very good. Thanks a lot. All right, questions from council for Ben.
I have a question. Ben, can someone remind me how many units are in phase 1?
8 units. They're 8 units. They're all 2-bedroom units, 800 square feet a piece. And they are all, this was another thing that I wanted to touch on. They are all, because we're anticipating relocating current tenants, they're all AMI adjusted rent units. And that's why phase one doesn't significantly offset the annual loss. It doesn't make the project profitable. It hardly offsets that. So we spend 2.2 million and it doesn't put the housing fund in a significantly better position.
Right. So one of my thoughts, I keep on going back and forth on this, and it's like, oh, let's return the bond. And then as I look at it, and I think one thing you kind of cleared up is of the American Rescue Plan and the NEU funds, which were 631, those can be used on about anything, right? Or sewer or housing. My only concern with that 631 is I kind of feel like that's the people's money, the residents' money. Is it wise to spend $631,000 on 8 units? Do we need to be using that money to enhance the lives or make things better for the whole community? And would it be better to keep the bond to offset that 631 and use the bond for that because it's already been set aside, and then take the 631 and put it into our sewer system, put it into our infrastructure in some place where it benefits 5,000 people, as opposed to, the people that are in those 8 units, which are important, don't get me wrong, but, I just think that some of these proceeds need to better the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And you may have noticed that if all $631,000 was contributed to the housing fund, it would have 2.8 million, and phase one would cost 2.2 million with contingencies built in. So there is some margin there, but the housing fund is operating at on an annual loss. And so you do want some cushion just to be able to have a security net there. And I'm of the opinion that there's a perception, there would be a bad perception if the housing fund had to contribute to if the general fund had to contribute to the housing fund to keep it afloat. Now, what you could do is we could earmark the ARPA NEU funds until they're used, so that it doesn't have that same appearance as using sales tax money to fund the housing fund. So you could do it in chunks, incremental chunks. You could say, okay, we're okay with a $200,000 fund balance in the housing fund. And then if phase two didn't take off for a couple of years, then you may have to contribute another portion of that ARPA money. So that's another option, just to avoid that appearance of sales tax revenue funding the Walnut Lane project.
Anybody else? Questions? Luke?
Yeah, I've got a question regarding some of the ARPA funding for phase two that Rihanna had kind of like pointed us to. I guess one of them is if we were able to get a hold of those funds, we don't know what amount that would potentially be incorrect. Because we'd be in competition with all of the other like NEUs within the state. But if we were able to receive some of that money, could we potentially earmark some of that 631 from like the NEU funds for housing, with the contingency that if we get like the phase two funds for like the homeless stuff, then that can then go into the general fund and like phase two can kind of replace that?
Yeah, absolutely. That NEU money can be contributed to the general fund. So because of that standard allowance.
And then I know like in the presentation, there's the bringing up of like a master lease agreement and everything. And so I know that we currently have the capital to be able to pay for phase one in full and still have like basically the NEU funds left over. If we were to move towards like a master lease agreement, would it still make sense? Like, would we be able to go towards that phase two, like homelessness funding? Or I guess like, how would we be able to use those funds, if at all?
Sorry, if we did a master lease agreement, we would not be eligible for.
Kind of figure that, but just wanted to clarify.
Anything else, Luke?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
I just wanted to thank Ben for this. He did a really good job. He answered a lot of my questions, and I think a lot of just the misconceptions that can be out there. So I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions for Ben?
Yeah, so Ben, if we return this thing, if we return it, and they're saying the interest rates are predicted to go up 3 times this year or something, or whatever. There's a gamble that we play, if they go up, we could be incurring some big costs by doing it again, where we're kind of locked in where we're at right now. It's a good, potentially a really good thing where we're at. Is that a good assessment on that?
Yep, that's I'm not very good with crystal balls. On the insurance rates are unknown. We do anticipate that there will be an increase. I think if we start seeing rates that are doubling or tripling, then we're going to be dealing with some other issues, with bond financing. And I would remind council that we will rely on financing phase 3 as well. And that's really where the profitability and break even come into play with the Walnut Lane project, because some of those units are market rate. I wish I had a better answer.
No, I'm just wondering, like, if we get to that last phase and interest rates have doubled or tripled, then it could kick that out farther, right? If we had to renew it.
Yeah.
Do you think they would increase that much though? I mean, I've never interest rates to increase to double to 5%. That would be a big increase.
We're starting to see there's so much speculation right now, economic speculation. The inflation rate that the federal government calculated for 2021 is kind of scary. At 6%, with speculation that it is the actual inflation rate was higher than that. And that's how the federal government curbs inflation, is by increasing interest rates.
Right. All right. Any other questions? I'll ask for a motion to consider the return of the proceeds of the Series 2021 sales tax revenue bond. Ronnie.
I move to return the proceeds of the Series 2021 sales tax revenue bonds in the amount of $6,500,000 plus accrued interest to the bond purchaser.
Second.
I will second.
Second by Tawny. Ronnie, any further discussion? Tawny? Anybody else on the council? Kaylin?
I'll just say that the city and some of the council members and certainly the staff have been at this for a while, so it's a little disappointing to take this step for sure. But ultimately, what matters is that we take the most fiscally prudent path, which optimizes our chance for success at providing housing needs, regardless of short-term perceptions. So I will be supporting this.
Any other discussion or from council? All right, I'm going to call for the question or the vote. Sorry, Ronnie, how do you vote?
Aye.
Bonnie?
Aye.
Kaylin?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, we're getting to that bewitching hour, and we've got a couple of big decisions to make here. And Corey, do we have Danny on the Zoom?
I've been keeping in touch with Danny. She is still in closed session at the moment. She doesn't have a anticipated end date, but what I'm hoping is that we can continue with the item, and Danny's just going to join as soon as she can, if she can.
Okay. All righty. So,
Mayor, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room, and if she pops in, I'll just let her in immediately.
all right, well, hopefully you guys had all your legal questions answered by Danny previously, and I just want to open this up a little bit more for questions for Corey before I call for the question. So, Carly?
Yeah, I want to just make one clarifying point. Because Luke, Councilmember Wojciechowski, was on the Planning Commission regarding the rezone, if we could try to segment the discussion between the development agreement and the rezone, it will make it much cleaner. And we can have Luke recuse himself when we talk about the rezone. Just a clarifying issue.
Yeah, and is Mr. Satterfield out there anywhere? Summer, do you see Jake?
I do, just a sec. He should be joining.
All right. Here he comes. So questions for staff on the development agreement. All right, if there's no questions, then I will call for the question. Approval of the development agreement for 398 Cane Creek Boulevard, parcel 01001-0173 between JSAT Corp, Utah Corporation, DBA Blue Bison Development, and the City of Moab. Have a motion.
I move that the Moab City Council approve the development agreement for 398 King Creek Boulevard, parcel 01-001-0173 between JSAT Corp, Utah Corporation, DBA Blue Bison Development, developer, and the City of Moab, Utah.
Second?
I'll second it.
Second by Jason. Discussion, Kaylin.
You know, there's always uncertainty as we move, as development happens in the city and we modify our policies. Housing is obviously a critical need for the community. I think this agreement is similar to where we might end up with the possible changes to the zoning of R3. So in my estimation, it's close enough, and it's not by any means the last parcel in this last R3 parcel in the city that's going to be redeveloped in the next few years. And I think it will result in substantial amount of new housing for Moab residents.
Jason?
I'd like to echo what Kaylin said, and I think that there probably isn't a perfect criteria, but this is provides some housing for people we're trying to provide housing for. So I think it's good.
Tawny?
I agree with Kaylin and with Jason, and it probably isn't perfect, and I don't think there's a perfect agreement out there. I agree with what some people have said, that I kind of feel like we're being, I don't know, railroaded, blackmailed, not blackmailed, that's a bad word, but just kind of pushed into a corner. But, and I don't mean it's any individual's fault, but it's because this council and other councils have not taken our zoning as seriously maybe as we should have, and we've let things lag over 20 or 25 years. So I agree with Kaylin that this is close enough, and it provides a significant number of homes, and I think we need to just watch this carefully and do our best to ensure that we're doing the right thing, and look at this as an opportunity rather than the worst of two evils.
Luke?
Yeah, I'm very much of the same mindset as what everybody has said so far. As Corey had kind of mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the developer has stated that kind of dependent on the results of this meeting, they're going one way or another. And so with the decision that we're being faced with here, I think this is the pragmatic choice, is to move forward with this, where we're going to be increasing the number of units that are going to be built overall. So we're going to be increasing the supply of housing within the community, while also guaranteeing that 33% of those units are going to be designated specifically for like actively employed members of our community. So yeah, it's not perfect, but kind of like what Kaylin said, it's very much in line with the direction that the council is headed in terms of its reconsideration of our three. And yeah, one of the things that I noticed as I was canvassing is that, yes, we absolutely need affordable housing units, but we just need housing using periods, because people all across the economic spectrum within our community are really struggling to find housing, and we are struggling to maintain employment at a lot of the really key facilities and organizations within our community. So I'm for this.
Ronnie?
I'll be voting no. We have, we are currently undergoing changes to our code to look at more density in the R3 and R4 in exchange for units set aside for active employment households. And considering that the county with their high density housing overlay looks for 80% in those units, if you can do the math on 33% of 165 and look at the net increase of number of market units that you get with something like that, I feel like it's a giveaway, and it's a very bad message to be sending. And we have not addressed very key issues such as how we plan as a city to monitor these restrictions. All of our past discussions have looked at hoping that HASI would do that for us when we finally accepted that HASI was not going to do that for us. So I feel like there's a lot of incomplete thought process on this, and including the implications of that kind of impact on Cane Creek. So thanks.
All right, I'm going to call for the vote. Kaylin?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Connie?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Ronnie?
No.
All right, we've got 4 in favor. Motion passes. Ronnie is the dissenting vote. All right, next item on the agenda is proposed ordinance 2021-15, an ordinance approving the zoning map amendment for property located at parcel 01-001-0173, approximately 398 Cane Creek Boulevard, Moab, Utah, 84532, changing 7.9 acres of subject parcel zone from RA1 residential agriculture to R3 multi-household residential zone. Any questions for Corey on this? And I believe Luke has recused himself and removed himself from the meeting. Hopefully he'll come back for the rest of the agenda.
He's just in the waiting room.
Okay, very good. And he was a part of this. He has a conflict because he was on the Planning and Zoning Commission when this was discussed at that time. And so he's recusing himself for that purpose. So questions for Corey on this zone amendment? All right, I'll call for a vote or a question. Sorry, I'm getting my vote and question mixed up. Jason?
I'll move that the Moab City Council approve ordinance 2021-15, an ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for property located at parcel number 01-001-0173, approximately 398 Cane Creek Boulevard, Moab, Utah, 84532, changing 7.98 acres of the subject parcel zone from RA-1 residential agricultural zone to R-3 multi-household residential zone.
Corey has his hand up. I think he has something that he needs to correct or change or something.
Yep, that's it. We had 2 points during our discussion earlier. It was recommended by Danny that we potentially have a conditional approval here, requiring that in the case that the development agreement fails, the condition that would revert the property back to its pre-existing underlying zone district would follow standard municipal process. So it's something we would do, but it's doubling down and putting it right here in the approval. So that was a conditional approval that Danny had recommended. It isn't essential. Danny did also say it's not essential, but said that it wouldn't hurt to include that. Danny is closing up with her closed session in about 10 minutes. If we do have further questions on that, we can always come back to it. The second change was as a result of the updated records of survey for this property, the parcel square footage has changed from, and I've answered in other comments why this happened, but from the existing tax roll, which is at 9.98, to the updated survey, which happens on nearly every parcel, just outdated information. We get updated square footages, so that updated square footage would become, or excuse me, acreage would become 7.51 acres rezoned as opposed to the 7.98.
Okay, so would Jason just add that condition to the end of his motion if he so desires?
Yeah, I add that condition. I don't know how to.
Corey, could you just for clarifying purposes, reread the motion with those corrections for us?
I can, and I also have it prepared here if you'd like to read it verbatim.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, I'll redo the motion. I move that the Moab City Council conditionally approve ordinance 2021-15 and ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for property located at parcel number 01-001-0173, approximately 398 Cane Creek Boulevard, Moab, Utah 84532, changing 7.51 acres of the subject parcel zone from RA-1 residential agricultural zone to R-3 multi-household residential zone, subject to the following condition. In case that the development agreement fails, the conditions that would revert the property to the pre-existing underlying zone district RA-1 would follow standard municipal process for a rezone.
Great, thank you for that. Do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Tawny. Any discussion, Jason?
No.
Tawny?
No.
Anybody else from the council? Kaylin? Ronnie? No? All right, I'm gonna call for the vote. Jason?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Kaylin?
Aye.
Ronnie?
No.
Motion passes 3-1. Ronnie is a nay and Luke is a abstention. All right. All right, we move on. Oh, we're getting close, you guys. But I don't want to hinder anybody's reports. So please feel free to say what you need to say in the allotted time that you need to say it. So I do have 2 items on the consent agenda. One is a proposed ordinance 2021-01, an ordinance amending Moab Municipal Code 13.25 rates and charges. Those changes were in your packet, and also the approval of the minutes January 11th, 2022 regular meeting.
Mayor, I do have Marcy in the waiting room if there are any questions for her.
Okay. Questions for Marcy? Luke?
I don't have a question for Marcy. I was watching the vote on YouTube, and I don't know if I'm allowed like any sort of input now that the vote's like over, but I had a question because I think we had kind of talked about the conditional aspect of it being moot now that the developer has officially purchased the property and everything like that. So because I remember I had some concerns about whether we could add a condition to the actual rezoning that if like the development agreement like fell through, if like the zone could like revert back to like the RA1 kind of like that, or did I misunderstand what was in the the motion that said that if it fails, that we would still have to go through the traditional rezoning process to rezone it back to RA1.
I believe that's what the motion stated. All right, we have the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Kaylin, second by Tawny.
Can I
Any
make a
discussion,
comment?
Kaylin? Tawny?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I think you said at one of our in-person meetings that we can move the bills to the consent agenda. Is that right, Ben?
Mm-mm. I don't think we can. Ben?
You don't, oh, okay. I was just gonna say, if we can, we might consider it, but if it's not the right thing to do, that's okay.
I don't think we could, Ben.
We'd have to look at the format of how it's presented because currently it's just a verbal report of the bills. We could look at that. Well,
Yeah.
me and Summer can look at that.
That'd be great. Look into that. Let us know. Just another way to expedite the meeting. Okay, so we've got a motion by Kaylin. Discussion. Anybody else have a discussion on the consent agenda? Ronnie?
I just want to thank Summer. I had 2 changes on the minutes. Thanks, Summer.
You're welcome.
All righty. I'm going to call for the question. Kaylin?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, municipal reports and then mayor council reports. We'll start with you, Carly.
Hey, good evening. In the interest of time, I'll make this quick. One announcement that I want to make you all aware of in case you get questions from the community. We are proceeding with the community contributions process again this year. There is information on the city's website about how to apply. You can access the application online and applications are due, I believe, March 1st. So you have budgeted $55,000 for this program. So I just encourage everyone who qualifies to please apply for consideration. Residents will notice that work for the Mill Creek water line is ongoing, and in the next few days, they will be moving over to Dave's Corner Market, which is a very busy corner. So if you can avoid that area, that will be great. We'll have 2 lanes of traffic, but it's still quite tight. So if you can avoid it, you should until about Friday or Saturday. We are trying to schedule a training and a team building exercise for this council. And we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but we've had some hiccups with our original date, which was this Friday. And I just wanted to run some alternative dates by you. These are both Friday mornings and either February 18th or February 25th. If you don't have any immediate concerns with that, that would be good to know. Also, in the next couple of days, just shoot me an email to let me know if you're available. And one just final item, yesterday our phone systems were down at City Hall. And so I want to acknowledge that and apologize for any inconvenience to the community as a result, but the issues should have been resolved by now. And that's all.
All right, Carly. Ben?
So Summer and I have been working on the presentation of financials to the city council. So it's a state auditor's office requirement that the council receive. The language in the code is kind of interesting. So it's monthly summarized financial statements and quarterly detailed financial statements. And so we decided the best place for those, it doesn't require a vote. It's just a presentation to the council. But we wanted to put it under department reports so that if the council had any questions about the quarterly financial report, that you'd have the opportunity to do that. So with that, that wraps up my report.
Great. Thanks, Ben and Carly. Moving on to mayor and council reports. I'll start with you, Jason.
All right. I don't know if Ronnie wants to give the last EMS meeting or if he wants me to.
It's up to you. Feel free to go.
Ronnie's reports are way more detailed than mine will ever be. She's very good at it. but just a few things. I went to the EMS special service board meeting. They've moved into their new building. They're missing garage doors, so they're not fully functional yet. You know, they ended the year at 1,675 calls, which was pretty good, and which is an 18% increase over last year. They were predicting at 20%, so that's pretty good, pretty close to what they thought. And other than that, they're just going at things and doing what they're doing. You know, a couple of things that kind of came up that I kind of wanted to bring to the board was that you guys all got emails from the UTV companies, you know, and I wanted to say that might have been me doing that kind of instigated that. You know, I got an email from a UTV company asking me, you know, about the sound ordinance and about how to, you know, how it was going to be, how the ordinance was going to be put into effect and how they were going to be checked and everything. And I didn't have the answers. And I told them, I go, you know, I don't have the answers. You guys probably should write letters to the whole council, because I will not do a very good job of sharing those concerns, you know. And all of a sudden, every UTV company sent in letters. And I think it's something that that we need to address coming up in the next few months, because I've heard people who, you know, on the other side of it, that are frustrated because nothing's, they perceive that nothing's being done. And the UTV companies don't know what they need to do. They don't know what the rules are and the laws. I've had a few short little email things with the county attorney, and I just think that, I don't know, it'd probably be in everyone's best interest to kind of lay it out how we're going to go forward, and what the residents can expect and what the UTV companies can expect, because I don't think anyone at this point knows where it's going. So, and that's, you know, so I'd like to throw that out there, that would be good to address. And other than that, that's all I have.
Yeah, Jason, I've talked to Carly and Ben about this, and I think it would be worthwhile for us to have, I don't know if we need to have a workshop before a council meeting coming up or something, so that at least you and Luke and myself have a really better understanding of the ordinances from both the city and the county. So let's see if we can make that happen sooner than later, just so that we can at least address concerns. You know, the three council members that have been involved in this already probably a little bit more in tune, but I think for us it'd be really good if we get a really good kind of thorough report on what we can and cannot do. I mean, just the whole thing and how it compares to the county. So anyway, I just think that's important for us newbies here in the room.
I agree.
All right, Ronnie. You're muted, Ronnie. There you go.
Oops. Okay, I will apologize, but there were some important meetings. First of all, okay, January 14th, I attended a Zoom meeting that was organized by Sarah Stock and Arnie Holtquist about a grant that Grand County was applying for to become a member of the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. So very interesting, and sometime when we have more time to discuss monitoring, a very important thing for us all to learn about that we can talk about more. Then on the 19th of January, we had our, what are now going to be, I think, everything keeps changing on how frequently everyone's meeting, but I think we're still meeting monthly for System of Care, the Grand San Juan Regional Advisory Council agenda, and just some highlights there that I think are good for our community to hear. Currently helping 10 families in Moab. And just in case people didn't know, the schools are the #1 referring agency. So I know System of Care is very grateful for that. And please, anybody who could benefit as a family or knows a family who could benefit, just contact me and I will put you in contact with them. We had our quarterly Moab Tailings Pile Steering Committee, I screwed up that acronym, but anyway, our steering committee meeting today, several good highlights for the community to know about. There is a new deputy to Russell McAllister at DOE, for those of you who need to make contact there, and that's Matt Udovich. He's been involved with the project since 2009, so it's good historical perspective. For people wondering about project funding, there is a continuing resolution still going on with the federal government for last year's budget until February 18th. At this point, everybody's hoping that a budget will be approved. That would help us. We've been getting about $48 million for the project, the UMTRA project. And the last ask that went in for this year was 85 million, and we're waiting to hear about that. The hope is that we'll come in at about 67 million, which would allow purchasing of more heavy duty rail cars and some other ideas in the pike, or upgrading infrastructure, which they've been wanting to do at the rail bench to allow more cars on each train that moves tailings. As of a week ago, we were over 12 million tons moved. They have moved 300,000 tons this fiscal year. They remain on target to move at least 1 million tons of tailings each fiscal year. Let's see, a few other key things for you, those of you watching. Colorado River is expected to have a peak flow in March. So far, we're not thinking we'll see any flooding at the site. I know some of you follow the sculptures that have been going on in Green River and that have been anticipated in the community honoring Old Spanish Trail. And basically they're metal sculptures that show pack animals and their riders that honors kind of the heritage of the Old Spanish Trail in our community. It really is believed to be something that helped our community be founded in the sense that that trail is where we were able to cross the Colorado River. So UMTRA has been working to try and get some of those sculptures set up on the edge of their property. And as one can imagine, it just takes a lot of time to get permission for that on DOE land, but they're hoping that'll happen in the next few months. They're at the point of being working on the 60% design. So 60% of the way through, there'll be a 90% design too for the cover on the site. Assuming we can keep moving what we're moving and there aren't funding or potentially delays in equipment, we're still thinking that the site can be completed, you know, before all of the last minute things that have to be, but tailings moved anyway, by the 2026, 2027 mark. Let's see, aside from that, I think this is the time. I had a brief conversation with Carly this morning just to check if it's even feasible, because I know a while ago, the Multicultural Center director had made some comments that it'd be great if the city and the county looked at any potential code changes that we could do to protect the most vulnerable in the community from short-term evictions. And this is specific to people who are renting trailers, because there's a 9-month protection for people who, remind me, Carly, what the 9-month protection is.
For those who own their trailer.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was going to say, but for some reason that didn't sound right. So anyway, it sounds like we could look into that if it's something that the council wants to do. So I'm just throwing that out there. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ronnie. Just to emphasize what Ronnie said about, I mean, if we actually get $67 million to the tailings removal, that's a huge, huge win. And just the work that Ronnie and Mary have done to make that happen is pretty remarkable. So that'll be interesting if we actually get that amount of money. Donnie, I know you're not feeling well, so
I am not. I can do hard things. You've done a lot of work on that tailings pile too. Do not sell yourself short.
Thanks.
113, I went to the Canyonland Healthcare Special Service District, and mine's going to be really short because my throat is sore. It was basically just, we had our admin reports and financials, and we put out an RFP for our governmental audit, and we are looking for new board members. And last Wednesday, I attended the museum meeting. They are back to Zoom meetings, obviously, because transmission is high. We worked on our financials and we worked on our self-improvement districts. We broke into little groups. That was kind of fun. That was a feature of Zoom I'd never seen before. And the museum is also looking for board members. And Thursday, I went to the Housing Authority meeting. That was pretty much just a business meeting. And the big exciting news that the Housing Authority still is Arroyo Crossing, and how many of those houses have been started. And I think there are 2 more families that qualified for there are 7 homes that have been started, and there are two more families that qualified for the other 2 that Hasu are building in this initial phase. And on Wednesday, I went to the seminar that was held by Craig Call on land use. And I thought it was a really good reminder. Some of it I knew, some of it I'd forgotten, some of it was new to me information. And I thought he did a really good job of keeping things going, and his stories were pretty fun. And he just reminded me a lot of what we've been told before, but may have forgotten. And I think that's it for me. And no, I do not have COVID. I had a negative test, but I sound like hell.
Thanks, Tawny. Get well soon and take care of yourself. Drink lots of fluids and take some aspirin and call me in the morning.
I took 2 Tylenol and I'm so sick of water and tea I could scream.
All right. Very good. Kaylin.
I attended no city-related meetings in the last 2 weeks.
All right. Good for you. And Luke.
I'm not on any boards or anything right now, but I did listen into the mechanical advisory committee, and it looks as though they need to clear up some language just to make sure that it's like understandable to contractors and everything with a common language. But they're moving towards including I can't remember if it's going to be requirements, but in terms of having homes ready for multiple like fuel sources and primarily kind of like electric only homes, which can potentially increase costs, but it's kind of the state looking out for being more energy efficient and like greener energy like that. There's actually a very long, very detailed list presented by a representative from the Utah Home Builders Association in opposition to these proposed amendments. But at the end of it all, it does seem as though the committee is inclined to move forward with that. I believe they were also looking to address kind of standardizing a type of education requirement in order to be able to design HVAC systems, because I guess there's a lot of issues across the state where like Rocky Mountain Power and a lot of developers are receiving significant complaints from new homeowners that their HVAC systems aren't performing up to par. I learned that I guess there's some sort of national study going on, and so far they have like an ongoing study, and so far they have determined that 95% of HVAC systems in the United States are not performing at the rated at their rated levels. And I guess a lot of them are actually I think on average, they perform at, if I remember correctly, 56% of the rated levels. So there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not it is actually with the design or what. And so I think Rocky Mountain Power is offering to contribute, I believe it was $25,000 to help kind of implement the study to determine exactly where what's causing some of these discrepancies and everything like that. So yeah, nothing directly city related, but kind of interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, nice, interesting. So Tawny mentioned the Craig Call presentation last week. He has a great book and I think an online opportunity that's really good. I encourage council, if you're not really familiar with planning and zoning, to either purchase that book or purchase the online version of it, because if you ever have any questions on planning and zoning, that book is a great reference to help you understand that. Ronnie.
There was a time, I think, where the city once in a while would buy that kind of thing for council or planning commission members. And so I'm just wondering if that would be a nice gesture just in case. But anyway.
No, great idea. Could we do that? Okay, good. All
And
right.
sorry, last added thing, can we make sure to order them not from Amazon, but from our local bookstore?
Sure, of course.
Yes, keep it local. Very good. I attended our first city and county joint meeting on Monday. It was very productive. I think it went really well. It was between myself and Mary McGann and Gabriel Wartek and Ben and Carly and Barrett and Mallory. Kaylin will be participating in those meetings, but I thought it was really good. It was a great way. We answered a lot of questions that were kind of unknown, and I think it's a really good way for us to keep each other's issues on the radar and see where we can work together. So we're intending to meet on a monthly basis. I also, you'll be seeing an email from me. I want to continue our monthly meetings with the council. So we'll, the week of the 7th after the council meeting, probably 9th through the 18th, I'll see, I'll have an email come out so we can coordinate meetings like we did last month. And so look for those emails and let me know what dates work for you. I met with Jen Sadoff today to talk about what we're going to call MAPS 2.2, which is the remaining development that the healthcare district owns, where the hospital behind the hospital, where the MAPS senior housing is. We really want to focus on housing options for healthcare workers, and we feel like we really need to start that process and look at that whole 8 acres again and do a site plan for those 8 acres, which would include the first phase will be rental apartments for healthcare workers. So those discussions just started today. You'll be hearing more about that as we move forward. Carly and I met with our lobbyists up at the state capitol last Thursday. That was very productive, as we mentioned already. There doesn't seem to be a lot of big ticket items, but definitely we'll keep you posted as we move through the legislative session. And also met with Jane May and Happy Morgan yesterday to, just help them resolve. I think the previous council heard from them and citizens to be heard, and we felt it was really important to get together with them and report on the investigation results and just have a conversation about how we can move forward in a satisfactory way to hopefully resolve some of the issues that they have with the city. So probably a few more meetings with them, but I just wanted to let you know that that has happened. And that's all I have. So Tawny, we'll end with you with the approvals of the bills.
I move to pay the bills against the city of Moab in the amount of $835,437.64.
We have a motion? Is that a motion from you, Tawny? Second.
Yeah, it was a motion.
Second by Kaylin. Thank you. Any discussion? All right, I'm just gonna, I have to do a roll call. Kaylin?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
And Jason?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Ben, you can pay the bills. All right, you guys, great meeting. Very difficult decisions, but you guys did an excellent job, asked some really good questions. I think we've got a lot done. And so now I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn at 9:30. I was only half an hour late.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
All right, all in favor.
Aye.
Bye, you guys. See you soon. Stay safe. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.